Meeting for the town of Lunenburg, June 13th, 2020. I have been outside with the checkers. I can tell you with certainty that there is a quorum. Over 50 people have registered and hopefully are all in the room at this point in time. The warrant has been properly served and been returned to the clerk's office. Would ask you all to now stand, address the flag, and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now let's start things off right. Let us have the pleasure of having Rose Beardmore join us. She's going to reprise her rendition of the national anthem that she performed at the Memorial Day ceremony, and which, by the way, is still available on YouTube and on the PAC TV. So at this point in time, Rose, please. No microphone. Oh, there you go. Fill the room, Rose.
Stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Rose, that was beautiful. Thank you. For those of you that don't sing a lot, that's a very challenging song. It has a tremendous range that you have to go from bottom to top. It's not easy to sing, and not easy to sing a cappella. So excellent job, Rose. Okay, at this point in time, I'd like to call on Mr. Tom Alonso for a few remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I will keep these brief. As usual, we like to recognize people on the board who would not be returning. This will be their, at least temporarily, their last selectman duties at town meeting. This year, there are 2 people not seeking re-election. So we have Phyllis Luck. Phyllis has been a selectman for 2 terms, from 2014 to 2020. She's been a member of the Stormwater Task Force and served as chair from 2015 till today. She's been on the MART Advisory Board from 2014 till today. She's been on the Montechusett Metropolitan Planning Organization from 2019 to 2020, a member of the Charter Review Committee for 2018 to 19, and a member of the Land Acquisition Committee of for 2019 too. It's been a pleasure to serve with her. She is not able to be here today, but I wanted to recognize her for all her service and service to the town and honor her by these remarks. Equally, Mr. McQuaid, to my left, he will not be seeking re-election. He has been on the Historical Commission from 2012 to 2013, Planning Board from 2013 to 2017. He's been a selectman since 2017 until today, a member of the Capital Planning Committee from 2017 till today, member of the Building Reuse Committee on 2014, and he is a member of the TC Passios Building Design Committee from 2019 to the present, and again, I want to thank him for his service to the town, recognize him, and say also that it was an honor to serve with him. And I think we have something, Madam Town Manager, for Mr. McQuaid. So please join me in showing appreciation. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Alonso, and thank you to our own Kathy Clark for providing the beautiful flowers. The charter directs me to appoint and for you to ratify a deputy moderator should anything happen to me during this meeting or during the coming year. And so, as I have done previously, I would nominate for your consideration Rob Bowen. If there's anyone who objects to The microphones have been placed as you see them, sufficiently distant from others in attendance. The microphone is on and will remain on. There's no reason for you to touch it. If the height needs to be adjusted, we'll find somebody to adjust it for you. And in case you might wonder, as my wife did, the microphone can't pass back to you any spittle that might have arrived on it. So you're safe from the microphone as long as you don't kiss it. If you wish to speak, line up on the markings on the floor as indicated. Stand in line 6 feet apart. State your name and your street address. And it would work best if you would exit going up and out back to your seat. Or if you're going to be at this microphone, go out the door, out and around, and back to your seat. Water is allowed in the auditorium. If you need a nourishment break, please respectfully leave the auditorium. That goes for leaving after this meeting as well. Please respect the social distancing requested by others. Obviously, if there's an emergency, people will exit safely and orderly, and we have plenty of police officers to direct you. The chief of the fire department is here as well. Bearing in mind that everyone's in a different emotional state with this virus. There are those who think it's all overblown and those who are quite anxious. All need to be respected. I'm going to dispense with my usual long remarks about the guidelines, because I can tell the people that are here, those that I still recognize, I can tell most of you probably memorized it over the years. I will just say this: if the situation arises, like there's a point of order, or 7 people want to challenge my vote, stand with your card raised. And the people here on the stage are going to help me so that I will see you. Don't yell out. If there's a second on a motion, that'll be done by raising your voting card at your seat. And again, I will try to look up and find and notice people. You have the full motion language for each article in your handouts for a consent calendar. We've used this method of a consent calendar in the past with revolving funds. These are articles that are considered to be by the town meeting planning committee, the board of selectmen, and the finance committee. So please take a look at those articles as we go along. We'll deal with that shortly. I will read the articles, their numbers, with a 1 or 2, maybe 3 word heading. This should expedite so we don't have to skip along and keep reading things. You're all capable of reading them yourselves. Then we'll have 1 vote at the end. Just like we do with the budget, if there's any one voter who wants to address an article that we thought could be in the consent calendar, raise your card, raise it high, and we will notice you, and we'll take that out of the consent calendar, and we'll deal with that matter as it appears on the regular warrant. So I'm going to read the article, a little bit about what it is, and then we'll vote on it at the end. So, To begin, the consent calendar. I move that the town advance for consideration Articles 1, 2, 4, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, and that it take action on those articles without debate, all as printed in the handout. Is there a second? Thank you. Select Board recommendation.
Recommend approval.
Finance Committee.
Recommended approval.
Thank you.
Or had no recommendation on any of the items.
Thank you. Article 1 is being recommended we pass over Article 1. Those are your written reports. Article 2 is reauthorizing revolving funds. Article 4, Board of Selectmen recommended passing over. Article 9, Board of Selectmen recommended passing over. Article 10 is money appropriating funds to operate the Sewer Enterprise Fund. Article 11 is a transfer to the Sewer Capital Reserve Stabilization Fund. Article 12 is a transfer to the Sewer Enterprise Retained Earnings OPEB Trust Fund. Article 13 is to appropriate funds for the Solid Waste Disposal Program, the yellow bags. Article 14 is money for the Water Enterprise Reserve, the Water Department, which is not the Water District, it's a few homes serviced by the city of Fitchburg. Article 15 is the budget for the local access TV. Article 16 is the salary administration plan. I'm told if you look at it carefully, it's adding some descriptions and some grades. Article 17 is investing money from the library trust fund, setting up a new fund. Article 18, the Board of Selectmen are recommending that we pass over that. So I didn't see, no one, I do have a card raised. Okay. Mr. Launder, if you could address at the microphone, please. Your name and street and the article that you'd like to take out of the consent calendar.
So for Article 18, amended to receive a written report from the Thomas C. Pacios Building Design Committee, which is attached to the consent calendar.
You're asking, so your name is John Londa.
John Londa, 97 Autumn Road.
Okay, and you're asking that the Article 1 on reports, or which article, please?
Article 18 be amended to receive a written report.
You want to take that out of the consent calendar?
If we can amend this to read that we received the written report. We have the written report attached to the handout.
Okay, there's a handout on the building committee, TC Pacios Rebuilding Committee. So therefore, that was why it was included in the consent calendar, that we don't need them to give a verbal report, but the written report has been submitted. Is that sufficient, Mr. Londa?
As long as the report goes into record.
Say it again.
As long as they're bringing the written report into the record.
A written report would be as a part of the record. Is there a second to Mr. Londa's amendment? There's a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand of making sure that the written report from the building reuse is included in the consent calendar. I see many hands. Anyone opposed to adding it to the consent calendar as a written report? I see none. Therefore, that amendment is made. Therefore, for the consent calendar and the articles that I have just addressed, all those in favor, please signal by saying, in favor of passing those articles as they are in the motion sheet, please raise your cards by signaling aye. Anyone opposed? It's unanimous. So we shall begin with Article 3. Article 3, Mrs. Adams.
Bear with me for a moment here. Oh, it's the other side of the Passover sheet. Okay, I even had it circled. Okay, Article 3, I move that the town vote to transfer the sum of $476.21 from free cash for payment of prior year expenses.
This requires a 9/10 vote, which is why we took it out of the consent calendar. Is there a second, please? I see seconds. Board of Selectmen recommendation.
Recommend approval.
Finance Committee.
Recommend approval.
Ms. Lemieux, can you tell us about the sum of money?
These are two invoices from previous fiscal years, one from Verizon and one due to Sentinel and Enterprise.
Thank you. So I don't see any hands or anyone at the microphone, so I declare we're ready to vote. 9/10 vote. All those in favor of the article, please raise your card. Anyone opposed? Article passes unanimously. Article 5.
I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate $0 to fund the first year of the FY20, FY21, and FY22 Police Officers Collective Bargaining Agreement dated July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2022 with the IBPO Local 353 AFL-CIO.
Is there a second? I see seconds. Board of Selectmen recommendation.
Recommend approval.
Finance Committee.
Recommend approval.
Thank you. Ms. Lemieux, I believe you have a slide.
I do. So this was an article to approve the first year of the police union collective bargaining agreement for the agreement dated July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2022. And this was passed over at the November 19th, 2019 special town meeting based on legal advice at that time that since no appropriation was needed, a town meeting vote was not necessary. However, according to case law, a provision in the state collective bargaining agreement or law requires this vote, even a $0 appropriation, to bind the town to the cost items in the agreement. The budget approved at the 2019 annual town meeting exceeded the amount that was needed to fund the first year of the agreement by an estimated $15,000 at the time of the signing of the agreement in November, and therefore does not need an additional appropriation. That's why you see the $0 in the motion. Based on the current actuals versus estimated affected wage categories, there will be a surplus of approximately $69,000 this fiscal year in the affected wage categories at the end of this fiscal year. When we were undergoing negotiations, the members of the police union provided a very thorough compensation analysis with comparable towns showing that our officers were underpaid. All of the data was also verified by the town. In order to address this gap, the agreed upon bargaining agreement included a 2.5% for year one to fiscal 20, a 2% COLA in fiscal 21, and a 2% in fiscal 22. It also provided for an increase in the educational incentive of $3,350 spread over 3 years by adding $1,100 in year one, $1,100 in year two, and $1,150 in year three. Partially due to the attrition of staff during fiscal 20, the amount budgeted for fiscal 20 covered all contractual increases in this proposal, including salary, overtime, educational incentives, and longevity. As previously stated, the police budget will be turning back approximately $69,000 from those affected wage line items. Also, the town has made a concerted effort to move from a percentage-based longevity stipend to a flat fee, and the police union agreed to this proposal in this contract. Based on the fiscal 21 recommended budget, the estimated cost for fiscal 21 will be $128,770 and approximately $121,292 in fiscal 22. This includes impact on salary, longevity, educational incentive, and all overtime categories. And that's a summary of the
Thank
full
you.
contract cost.
Okay. If anybody wants to ask a question or make a comment, you can come up to either one of the microphones. If it's anybody from finance or the select board, you can simply raise your card. Okay, Mr. Passios. Name and address, please.
Thank you. Dave Passios, 56 Whiting Street, member of the Finance Committee. Just have a quick question as to why the number escalates so much in 21-22 from the estimated, if we're covering in 20 under $100,000, why is there such an escalation in the next 2 years with the percentages not all that different?
The main categories that were affected that would increase that were the, I think it was the longevity and the educational incentives. And that's based on, that increase is based on, from the actuals and not the FY20 budget. So the 128 is based on what were the actuals for fiscal 20, not an increase over the appropriation amount.
Okay, so what you're saying is fiscal 20 is actually coming out higher than originally estimated also. It makes sense then. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jeffrey.
I'd like to note that I was not in favor of this collective bargaining agreement with the police union for the reason that I don't think it does enough. It's really important for police officers to be able to afford to live in our community. Although we have a lot of variety of roles where it's not as critical for employees to be community members, when it comes to policing it is. You know, looking at surrounding communities and recognizing that we are not paying our police officers a comparable amount, certainly I support an increase in their wages, but we need to be able to look at affordability and if those wages allow our officers to afford to live in our town. And I don't believe that we've done enough. I also recognize that due to the nature of policing, a lot of times it's police officers who are married. They're unable to have a dual family household, or when they do have a dual income household, you know, the second job really has to kind of work around the first. And so it creates a dynamic where it's a little more difficult for two household members to have a similar role and care for their families. Having said that, I will support this article, but I'd just like to note for the future that I think that we need to invest a little more heavily in our police department.
Thank you. Anyone else on Article 5? Seeing no one else, we declare we're ready to vote. All those in favor of Article 5, please signal by saying aye. Excuse me, raising your hand. What's the habit? Okay, thank you. All those opposed? Zero funding, passes unanimously. Article 6,
Move that,
Capital Plan. Thank you, Mr. McQuaid.
move that the town vote to transfer free cash the sum of $647,880 to fund the FY21 capital plan as appearing in the capital plan report as printed in the town meeting warrant booklet.
Thank you. Is there a second? Somebody? Thank you. Board of Selectmen recommendation.
Board of Selectmen recommend approval 3-1 with 1 abstention.
Finance Committee.
Finance Committee deferred.
Deferred. So you're going to need to caucus at the end of this discussion, correct? So Mr. McQuaid or Ms. Lemieux, tell us about this article.
I can do a presentation. So the Capital Planning Committee received 28 project requests totaling $4.3 million. They met from September until January, and the original recommendation capital plan for fiscal 21 included 21 projects totaling $1.329 million, funded from tax revenues and free cash. Due to the coronavirus outbreak in March, the projected economic impact to the town's finances, I met with the Capital Planning Committee on April 16th to inform them that the portion of the plan that was to be funded from tax revenues, which was $650,000 of the $1.329133 million, would be reduced to be solely funded from free cash, cutting the capital plan in half. The intent is to defer these decisions into the fall town meeting when we have a better financial picture of the impact of the town's revenues. The committee reviewed all the projects at this meeting and re-voted all the projects with new prioritizations. Their new recommendation has a revised total of $647,880. And this, highlighted in the red, you'll see there was one project that has already gone out to bid and received proposals. So that project was reduced from $123,500 to $106,580. I'm going to review the projects that are being recommended in the capital plan today. For facilities, it included a replacement of sidewalk and ramp in front of the town hall to comply with ADA requirements. The project was submitted in fiscal 20 for a total of $22,000. It included the senior center front entrance reconfiguration, and that was submitted in fiscal 17. This will reduce liabilities and reduce operating expenses by eliminating leaks created by ice dams. This capital request was for $24,000. For DPW, for the design and the replacement of the Flat Hill culvert. This culvert is categorized by Mass DOT as a severe deficiency and the urgency of repair as soon as possible. We could apply for small bridge program grant funds through Mass DOT for the construction costs. The capital request for the design is for $112,500. For police capital projects, it includes one marked police cruiser that is an additional vehicle to cover previous new hires that are coming out of the academy for their vehicle. Capital request is for $67,000. For the replacement of the ACO vehicle to comply with the energy efficiency standards under the Green Communities program. This car would be a Ford Transit Connect van or a similar type vehicle. This project was submitted in fiscal 20 for a cost of $26,000. It includes the replacement of portable radios for the police department. This project was submitted in fiscal 16 as part of the replacement schedule for a total of $45,000. For the fire department, includes the replacement of the other half of the self-contained breathing apparatus, which has served its expected lifespan. This project was submitted in fiscal 17. The town received an earmark for $100,000 for one half of the self-contained apparatus, so this would be for the other half of the contingent. So each self-contained breathing apparatus includes a face mask and two 30-minute rated bottles, and the total request is for $115,000. Picture. Also for the fire department, includes phase 1 of the ALS equipment for the ambulance. This would outfit one ambulance to the paramedic level. The equipment includes a defibrillator and a cardiac monitor, ancillary equipment for cardiac monitor, controlled access pharmaceutical dispenser, and the initial outlay for paramedic level required medications. This project was submitted in fiscal 16 for a total of $54,800. For the fire department also, a midlife overhaul of Squad 3. This will be serviceable until its scheduled replacement in fiscal 27, which the total replacement cost in fiscal 27 in our capital plan is for $1,146,000. The work will include rebuilding the pump, updating and replacing the vehicle lighting, repairing the body corrosion and paint, and repairing the roll-up doors as needed. The project was submitted in fiscal 20 for a capital request total of $65,000. For school capital request includes the Turkey Hill asbestos abatement, the final phase of this project. This includes ceiling replacement and removing asbestos that is reachable. The original capital request was for $123,500, and the project went out to bid, and the low bid was $106,580. The other school project request is for design for AC at the primary school classrooms, and this was requested in fiscal 19 for a total of $10,000. So the recommendation before you includes transferring $647,880 from free cash for the revised 11 capital projects.
I see you, Mr. Passios. Are you done, Ms. Lemieux?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Passios?
As Dave Passios, 56 Whiting Street. This motion is being made as a citizen of the town of Lunenburg and has not been thoroughly discussed with the Finance Committee. Short of deferring the entire, hold on, I'll make the motion first. I move to amend Article 6 by striking lines 3, 5, 6, 9, and 10. And to account for this change, transfer from free cash $294,500 to fund the remaining projects, and transfer from free cash the amount of $353,380 into special purpose stabilization fund.
Is there a second? I don't see a second.
There is,
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Beardmore seconded. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Passios, for my clarification, you handed this up, and we always ask people that want to make motions, if it's going to be complicated, to hand them up to us, write them out so we have them. When you read it, you did not say striking line 1. You started with striking line 3. Did you mean to strike 1?
yes, I did, I'm sorry, I
So
skipped
striking
over that
lines
first
1,
number.
3, 5, 6, 9, and 10.
That is
correct?
correct,
Okay.
yes.
So, Ms. Lemieux, can you put those lines up there for the body?
I'm sorry?
So, Mr. Passios wants to strike lines 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, and 10. For everyone's ease, can you put those up someplace where we can see them?
Can you highlight the
There
ones,
are-
can you highlight the ones that he's
I can't
asking to be stricken?
I can't highlight them on a PowerPoint.
She's saying she can't highlight them.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have a pointer? No? I have a but I don't think it's gonna help us much. Okay, while she's getting her pointer from the Finance Committee.
Requesting to strike. Do I have that right, Dave?
Don't have this.
Yeah, unfortunately, that was something that Mr. Passios
Oh.
gave to you, but everyone didn't have it, which is why we need it
All
up
right,
here.
sorry.
We'll see if Ms. Lemieux can find it. Okay, in the beginning, though, while she's finding the pointer, Mr. Passios, do you want to take us through, line by line, the things that you want to strike and what you're trying to accomplish?
Yes,
Can you get a little closer to the microphone? It might be my hearing, but... Never had
can.
trouble hearing you before,
again,
Mr.
Dave
Passios.
Passios, 56 Whiting Street. In reviewing the capital plan as the corona situation started to ramp up, there was discussion about deferring the entire plan back in the earlier days. The capital planning committee met, and the move was to fund as many projects as they could using free cash only. To be more conservative, we need to be setting aside free cash also until this thing flushes itself out. We don't know where we're going to be in November. We don't know where we're going to be a year from July. And the projects that I've asked to be stricken off of here are not time sensitive as far as I'm concerned personally, between now and November, a special town meeting, at which time, if it looks like we can afford to spend that money, then we could reinstate those projects. I do understand that the school asbestos project would probably be pushed off a full year because it needs to be done during the summer. But on the other hand, if kids are not in school going forward for a longer period of time than we are expecting, it can be done any time of the year. I'd like to go over the ones that I did leave in. Number 2, Flat Hill Culvert Design. That's an imminent disaster waiting to happen. It's been identified. Something happens there, the town is going to be liable for anybody that gets hurt, any property that's damaged, so on and so forth. And as the town manager said earlier, if we get the design under our belt, then funding should be available to repair it. Number 4, police vehicle. This is part of the fleet that's going to be needed with the police officers that are presently in the academy as we've been increasing the numbers of officers. If we don't have a vehicle for them to drive, they won't be out on the streets. The ACO vehicle, although seemingly not important, it may have an effect on our green communities certification, and for $26,000, I think that's a good insurance that we need to deal with now. Midlife overhaul of Squad 3, same thing here. This is more than preventative maintenance. This is to extend the life of a very expensive piece of equipment. Town manager mentioned that the purchase to replace this vehicle will be well over $1 million. And then number 11, the senior center reconfiguration front entrance. This area here is has been an ongoing problem, and the longer it's not corrected, the more damage to the building and the more cost to repair and or do temporary repairs on an annual basis or whenever it can be done. That would eliminate the ongoing maintenance problem for that facility. Thank you.
Thank you. First up here, Mr. Beard. Sir.
My name is Matthew Brenner. I live at 619 Northfield Road. I was just wondering if there's anyone who can speak more on the topic of whether it is feasible and safe to delay the asbestos project at the school.
Stay right there. Who can address that? Mr. Wanda? Right up there.
John Londa, Director of Facilities, Lunenburg Public Schools. So we have one final phase of removal of asbestos in this round. It's to remove friable asbestos. It's located above the original ceiling in 3 classrooms. Classroom ceilings are 50 plus years old now, and they don't provide a good seal from the friable asbestos in the classroom. That being said, we have not disturbed that asbestos. The only time that this project really can go, if school is running, is July, August, because it's a substantial project. Takes a long time to get the asbestos down, get the new ceiling back up, and the flooring as well. So it represents a hazard. We've been told by the Department of Labor to get this out of the school. It's been a phased approach. We're in the last phase. We bid this project in March and into April. And the reason we did that was because we only have that short window, July and August, to be able to do the project in FY21. We did get very, very competitive bids. In fact, this has been the most competitive. We had 5 companies bid, and that's what accounts for the price reduction. The contractors, I think, were probably looking for a lot of work, and so we got some pretty good pricing.
Thank you, Mr. Wanda. I'm getting this. Okay, so I've got Mr. Beardmore, and then the chief, and then 2 people in the Board of Selectmen. Go ahead, Mr. Beardmore.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Bear with me. I have a
Just
point
your
of...
name and address, even though
My
I
name is
recognize
Peter Beardmore. I live at 282 Pleasant Street. You need to bear with me. I have a point of information, a comment, and an amendment. My point of information would be really a question for the town council. Is appropriating that $353,000 and $380 into the special purpose stabilization fund in order into the way the article was written. Can we reappropriate that money into the special purpose stabilization fund from this article?
Go ahead, Mr. Costa.
Mr. Moderator, through you,
As you know from past experience, typically with respect to these sorts of questions that address whether something is within the scope of the article, I would initially defer to you, Mr. Moderator. I'm certainly happy to speak to the question if you'd so like, but I'll first give you an opportunity to opine.
Well, why don't you speak to it while I take a look exactly what the warrant said?
So, Mr. Moderator, my understanding is that the question, if I could, I guess, reiterate it in part, is whether whether this, the proposed amendment, the amendment that's currently on the floor, would be within the scope of the article as presented in the warrant. I believe that it would be based upon my reading of the article and based upon what's been presented. That would be my legal opinion, but again, I'm happy to discuss it further with you, Mr. Moderator, if you disagree with that.
Lawyers never disagree with lawyers, do they?
Mr. Moderator, I'm satisfied with the town council's answer.
Okay,
If you'd like me to withdraw.
that's
Let me,
fine.
let me make my comment.
You may continue.
Ladies and gentlemen, this article has been the topic of a lot of discussion, and this relates directly to both the next article, subsequent articles which deal with putting money into stabilization as well as the omnibus budget. The issue that we're facing as a town is we don't know how much money we got. And the reason for this is that the state has not told us what we're going to get in local aid for fiscal year 21, even though fiscal year 21 is now roughly 17 days away. The reality is that the legislature has been out to lunch on this topic and dealing with other issues. We can argue as to what's been an appropriate use of their time, but nevertheless, we don't know how much money we're getting. We've been told plan for a 10% cut. Our own state senator, after being challenged with other comments from other state senators and representatives that have been made into other towns, has told us that cuts of 15 to 25% are a good planning range. Towns in the Boston area that are contractually obligated to pink slip their teachers by the 15th of June have made their plans based on a 20% cut in state aid. We are further challenged in Lunenburg because the recent Student Opportunity Act puts us at a disadvantage, meaning as local aid is cut, it's not directly proportional to Lunenburg. We're going to get cut more, unfortunately. And so the reality is that we don't know how much money we have going into the next year. The town manager has submitted a budget, which we will talk about in the subsequent articles, that assumes a 10% cut in state aid. It is my position, and I think the position of most of the members of the Finance Committee, that we need to find additional areas to save money, at least set aside for a number of months, preferably until a fall town meeting, where we have a better idea of how much money we have, and then can reallocate that money into the capital plan as the capital planning the capital planning board has put together. I'm not questioning any of the cases that are being made for capital. We need to spend this money. The problem is that in the months of July, August, September, October, if we're told that we have substantially less than we think we're going to have by this budget, we're going to have to find other places to cut or other places to get money. Now, the town manager will tell you there are stabilization funds available that we can draw from. She is correct. However, many of you are also aware that we are looking to spend lots of money in debt in the coming years for TC Pass, Hill. Those borrowing costs will all be related to what we do in the subsequent months in our stabilization accounts. And so therefore, it is my opinion that we should cut as much as we possibly can from the capital plan right now, today, put it into stabilization in the subsequent article, or special purpose stabilization fund, I really don't care, and wait until town meeting to appropriate, next town meeting, the fall town meeting, to appropriate those dollars if we did not need them to keep a teacher or town hall staff or a police officer or firefighters or what have you anywhere in the town. I don't want to have to cut staff. I really don't want to have to hit the stabilization in the coming months. There, I would offer an amendment to the amendment to add 7, 8, and 11 to Mr. Pasco's article, to Mr. Pasco's amendment, excuse me. 7, 8, and 11.
Okay, so which one is 7?
7 is the ACO vehicle.
Is which? ACO vehicle?
8 is the midlife overhaul of Squad 3. And 11 is the senior center reconfiguration of the front entrance. Now again, I think these are all projects that we need to do. But I think that these are projects that if we decide to do in October, we can make that decision then. We really need that money for other things to run our government for this year. We can defer these until next year.
Mr. Passios, do you want to accept his amendment? You don't have to. We can vote on the amendment to the amendment separately.
I'd prefer not to.
You do not accept it. Okay. Is there a second to Mr. Beardmore's amendment to Mr. Passios' motion? There is a second. Okay, so that's seconded.
Mr. Moderator?
Oh, go ahead. Town council.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. If I could make a point of order. So I think that the town manager understood the previous speaker's amendment to the motion somewhat differently than I did, so I want to ask for a bit of clarity, just so proper advice is given to the town meeting. If the request is to adjust the appropriations for purposes of the capital plan, that would be an appropriate amendment. If the amendment is to move monies into stabilization as part of the pending article, that would be inappropriate under this article. That would occur under a later article, just to be entirely clear. So that transfer cannot occur as part of Article 6. It would need to occur later in the warrant under Article 8.
And Mr. Costa, my understanding from the reading of the article, excuse me, from the amendment from Mr. Passios was to put it in the special purpose stabilization fund.
And that would not be able to be done.
Thank you.
So for clarification, Mr. Moderator, that was the point of my point of information earlier.
Because the special purpose stabilization fund is in the next article?
No. So, Mr. Moderator, Article 8 is a vote to raise, appropriate, or transfer a sum of money into the general stabilization fund.
Yeah.
That is the article that I was referring to a moment ago. The article or the amendment that's on the floor is correct in my opinion within the scope, in as much as it strikes lines 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, and 10. But the transfer from free cash of the amount of $353,380 into the special purpose stabilization account would not be appropriate under this article, in my opinion.
So striking the numbers, those line items would be appropriate and within the scope. But transferring that amount of money into the special purpose stabilization fund, in your opinion, would be outside the scope.
That's correct, Mr. Moderator.
Okay, I'll let you address that, Mr. Pastor.
Yes, based on that decision, I'll be back on Article 8. I'd like to amend my original motion to delete everything after the cash number free cash number of $294,500.
Now, Mr. Beardmore, I think you were the second on his original amendment.
I think you recognize me. Mr. Allison also had his hand up.
Okay.
Gladly, I would gladly modify my second.
And where's Mr. Allison? Will he accept the amendment as well? Where's Mr. Allison? Here he is. Will you accept? Yes, thank you. Okay, good. Okay, so now we're back to two things. Originally, Mr. Pat, I'm getting there, I hope. Striking 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, and 10, and then amendment by Mr. Beardmore to also strike 7, 8, and 11. So we're going to continue to discuss and debate these. Eventually, we'll vote on Mr. Beardmore's first, then Mr. Passios, because that's the order, and then we'll vote on the entire article, see what's left. I do know there are two people from the Select Board that wish to speak. I will recognize you. I said I would recognize Chief Sullivan next.
Patrick Sullivan, 197 Reservoir Road, also the town's fire chief. I'll make this short and sweet. On the two items from the fire department, the SCBA and the ALS equipment, I would submit that those are time sensitive. We were able to replace half the breathing apparatus already. We have maintenance issues, training issues with the older units. The sooner we can replace them, the better. Also, the ALS equipment, if that is not funded in the fall, it puts the last 2 years of work that we've been doing to develop the paramedic program dead in the water. I can't speak to the other department issues that are on there. I'd let the other department heads speak to those. But what I would say is, for the last several months, the town manager, the capital planning committee, and the department heads have worked on this capital plan. They've worked on the reduced capital plan to the absolute bare minimum things that we need to accomplish right now. I would respectfully submit that the body vote against both amendments and vote yes on the original capital plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm getting there, I promise.
Not my thing, but what numbers were the ones he was talking about? Because I'm doing them.
Excuse me.
So that
Chief
we
Sullivan, come back to the microphone for a second.
I just want to,
5, 6, and 8.
What numbers are yours that you're speaking?
I'm sorry, and speaking on our articles, numbers 5, 6, and 8 that involve the fire department. I cannot speak to the other departments' issues on there. I would submit that the respective department head should speak to the concerns with those as well, but I would suspect they would be similar concerns.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting there. Mr. Levesque.
Jim Levesque, 33 Lancaster Avenue. I am speaking as a citizen. I was a member of the Capital Planning Committee as well. I am opposed to both amendments, specifically on lines 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. I believe the public safety issues are paramount to making sure that our officers and first responders are taken care of, as well as the citizens that they serve.
Thank you. Ms. Adams.
first of all, if I eventually take this off, I think I'm hyperventilating and I have a bad headache. But that aside, items 3 and 10 I wanted to specifically talk about. The asbestos has been being worked on for a long time. It's an air quality issue and it's a major health issue for the children. Teachers who've worked there for many years at the Turkey Hill talk about layers of dust that form on their desks in their classroom. In a time where we're talking about health and crowds and respiratory health, the idea that we would overlook something that we know is catastrophic to long-term health with asbestos, I think we got to keep that headed in the right direction. You know, there'll be a time if things turn out financially as bad as they could, where it won't be possible to accomplish these things, and I think things like this need to be tackled and kept the ball rolling in the right place. On the same topic of air quality and respiratory health, I think it's item 10, which is working on the AC for the classrooms in the primary. For people not familiar with the primary school, it was built in 2005, and the second floor is not a full second floor. It's like the eaves, like being in an attic. And usually in September, they have open house for parents. I've been in classrooms at night with like 30 adults, and the room temperature is 89 degrees. And that alone is unbelievable and unhealthy. And with kids going back to school with a new, look into health and everything, an item like that and moving forward with making air quality better where crowds gather is good under any circumstances. I feel like because of everybody having, like the previous speakers and then myself advocating for 3 and 10, there's a cherry picking that's going on where alls we're left with is 2, 4, and 11, based on the current amendments. And 11 is an entrance to a building. An entrance to a building versus asbestos. I think this has already been made a small
11
list.
was in my amendment.
What's that?
11 was in my amendment.
Okay, maybe we can summarize where we're at then, because
You can address all of the article. We're going to address the amendments and the motions
I guess
separately.
summarize which ones are gone and which ones are left.
You can
But
address
either
all of
way,
them.
I think this list has been whittled down to something small, and there are things that should be accomplished, and I wouldn't vote for the amendment.
Mr. McQuaid and then Chief Marino.
Again, speaking as chairman of the capital planning committee, we worked hard to already cut our budget in half. We didn't take any of these items lightly. As far as the asbestos abatement goes, it's already been, we went out to bid already. The number, there's $20,000 less than what we were assuming. That number's not going to be good in November. It's not going to be good next year. It's going to cost us an additional $20,000 or more to do the project next year. I can't, at this time, comprehend cutting police and fire equipment. Those are things that they need, they use every day. Cutting that is not acceptable to me. And in general, this is the problem with the capital plan. Cutting these things this year doesn't make them go away next year. There's always a revolving line of things that we need. It just makes the problem worse next year if we don't fund these things now.
Thank you. Chief Marino.
It's not that I don't support those amendments. I think those amendments should be amended, and I'll speak to that in a second. But what I would tell you is that I've been here for 40 years. I started right when Proposition 2.5 was implemented. The town took some serious measures to try to reduce the budget, which in turn cost the town a lot of money then. And I just want you to keep that in mind going forward. I agree that we should put some money aside because we don't know what's going to happen in the next several months. However, with respect to the capital plan, I know we've deferred a lot of things off until November to try to put that money in free cash, and I totally agree with that. The one thing I don't agree with is the fire department's breathing apparatus, and I don't know about all of you, but when my house is burned or when I'm sick, I want some big, strong firefighter who's got the proper equipment to do so, to throw me over his shoulder and carry me out.
Thank you, Chief.
Terry Birchfield, 1 Rose Garden Lane, Lunenburg. Basically, with the recommendation, and just to go over a little bit of the history of this, to make any of the amendments is really to try to get us to November, as Mr. Beardmore said. The town manager's budget, and this is where the comfort level in terms of what you feel ready to vote for today is really, all we're doing is looking at all of the data and making the best information available that we can. The town manager has written a very responsible budget that looks at what the state aid is anticipated to be at 10% reduction and has therefore deferred a lot of decisions to November already. Over time, we've been discussing more and more what the state budget might look like and what the state may do in terms of state aid availability. So in our last meeting, one of the reasons why we were looking at the capital plan again is not to say that we don't think these things are needed. We were basically looking and saying, can we wait until we know what we're getting from the state to know whether or not we're going to be able to even meet the budget as written. So really the decision is going to come down to the gamble that we take is there's not going to be any reduction in state aid and we can put everything back in the budget that was originally presented. Or there'll be a 10% reduction in state aid and we can be satisfied that all of the decisions we're making today as written will be easy to manage. If there's more than 10% reduction in state aid, then we're already running in the red. So if we end up running in the red, there'll be other decisions to be made in November. Now, yes, there is a stabilization fund that we as a finance committee tend not to, like recommend pulling out of, just because we do look down the road and we do see that there's going to be more debt incurred to change buildings around. The Turkey Hill building is going to be an issue over time. So basically, this recommendation is a let's strike everything because we don't think we need it. We think we need it. And again, it comes down to whatever you feel comfortable it's the risk that the town is willing to take, that the 10% will be a good number. And if it's not a good number, then we're back here in November and we're looking at potential cuts, or looking at transferring from stabilization in order to address whatever the need is. So that's basically where some of this is coming from. And I just wanted to be clear that we're not saying we don't think this stuff is necessary, and we're not even saying we don't think it's necessary now. I think we're just saying that at some point in the next several months, we will have more information, hopefully, by the fall town meeting, and can do that town meeting, and at that time take all of everything that we put into stabilization out and go forward. The other discussion that we were recently having, and unfortunately it was probably way too late to do any good here, was whether or not, instead of putting it into stabilization, we could put it into a reserve account. And if we had an earlier answer on things, except that it wouldn't help the capital plan, because that still has to be voted by the town meeting. So that's just to give you some sense of some of the things that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Sir.
Christos Lakaditas, 49 Maple Parkway, member of the Lunenburg Professional Firefighters. I want to expand on the Chief's comments regarding Article 5 and Article 6. First, regarding Article 5, it's irresponsible to put this off because it is a severe safety hazard. It currently is a safety hazard within the department. The packs are being replaced, like the Chief said, because of increased maintenance costs. And also the new packs are up to a newer standard regarding safety features. And the biggest one to me is that they've brought our low air alarm, which activates to let us know that we're running low on air, from 25% to 30%. And while that does not seem like a big number, it is several minutes. And the fact that we're currently using two different standards is irresponsible and unsafe to the members of the department. Second, on the ALS gear, completely agree with the Chief that if we continue to push this off, this plan is dead in the water. 2 years ago at town meeting, the town was presented with a 5-year plan and chose to accelerate that plan. Now in the 2 subsequent years after that, pushing that plan back. The plan has been equipment, which you see before you're here today, and personnel. They go hand in hand. The town has already spent significant money in training personnel to the paramedic level, and the question and concern has been brought up by boards in this town regarding the retention of those people. If we continue to push this off, we will not be able to retain the people that we have spent money to train. Departments all over the state and country are desperate for paramedics, and they will have no problem finding a job somewhere else. And now we will be starting over if and when we decide to take this seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alonso.
To speak to the against both of the motions and for the plan as originally presented. I want to say that, people on committees spent lots of time with the department heads who put in these requests. These are dealt with very methodically, they're dealt with very seriously, and some of them, as you can see from the presentation, were multi-year requests. And I think it's important that we listen to the people in the departments and the capital planning committee, who has already slashed their original proposal by $600,000. So clearly, I think they are taking the current economic situation in the state and the country seriously. Secondly, I also believe strongly in the leadership of the town manager and her financial department. By approving this, the money doesn't get spent on July 1st, okay? It gets put into being appropriated and under the guidance of the town manager and the departments about when and if these can be expended. So there is not their intent, as they also are navigating these economic waters, to go and spend it right away. And there's always the option of coming back in the fall and saying, you know what, we didn't take these actions, and if we need money, we can always rescind the appropriation without having gone forward with the project. And I think that is seeming to me the more responsible tack, as you can hear from all the departments, the school department on the asbestos abatement, from public safety for all their requests, for an ADA ramp, you know, knowing people who use that ramp or need that ramp, talk about it all the time. These are needs of people that have been waiting to get these things addressed. And I think we should go forward with them and trust in the leadership of the financial leaders of the town, and we should vote down these two amendments.
Thank you. Ms. Adams and Mr. Allison?
Sure, I just wanted to, I mean, there's people obviously waiting, so I'm close to, you know, moving the question, but I think the key is something that Selectman McQuaid said, is that these things don't go away, and it doesn't solve a problem not to get them. It just confounds the situation.
Thank you. Mr. Allison?
Hi, Matthew Allison, 188 Flat Hill. I'm also the third member of the capital plan to speak on this, on these two amendments. Unfortunately, after hearing all the information, I'm against both of them. Specifically 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Those are going to be town-wide. I mean, those are police and fire. They affect the entire town, where these individuals affect smaller groups. Unfortunately, nobody saw any of this coming in our capital planning. We had no idea that the circumstances that surround us now were going to be in place. I am entirely for saving money for the that is definitely going to be coming. But again, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, I am against not funding. So again, I'm against both amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, then Mr. Jeffries.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank Mr. McQuaid.
Your name and address, please.
Oh, Dave McDonald, Island Road, Lunenburg. First, I'd like to thank Daniel McQuaid and Phyllis Luck for their service to the town. You guys did a great job. Secondly, I'd like to move the question. Thank you.
Second question has been moved. I'm going to rule that out of order at this particular moment because I've already recognized 2 people to speak, Mr. McDonald, but then I do think we'll be ready to vote at the end of that. Mr. Jeffries, and then this gentleman, and then we'll bring it to a vote.
Everything I was going to say has already been said, so.
Oh, that was brief. I love it. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, Dave Mackey, 384 Townsend Harbor Road. Just want to voice my support for all 11 items. I've had the unfortunate privilege to have to call the ambulance for myself, and Lunenburg's always been there for me, and to not give them the equipment they need it's unconscionable. So I ask you to spend $600,000 in a $38 million budget. That took a lot of work to get down to that level. So I hope you vote for the capital plan as presented.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Beardmore, I do see you, but Mr. McDonald moved the question, and that requires a vote. So all those in favor, raise your hand of closing out the debate on the motion and the amendment. Okay, and all those opposed to closing out debate. Okay, the debate is closed. So the first thing we're going to do is vote on Mr. Beardmore's amendment to Mr. Passios' amendment. So Mr. Beardmore would strike number 7, ACO vehicle for $26,000. Number 8, the overhaul, of Squad 3 for $65,000. And number 11, the senior center front entrance for $24,000. Please raise your hand if you're in favor of striking those 3 things from the capital plan. That motion is defeated. Now we move to Mr. Passios's amendment, which is to strike number 1, which is the $22,000 ramp. Number 3, which is $106,000 for asbestos. Number 5, which is 145, 95? Excuse me, can't read my own writing. These things steam up after a while. 115,000 for fire equipment. Number 6 is ALS equipment for 54,000. Number 9 is portable radios for 45,000. And number 10 is air conditioning for the classrooms at the primary school for 10,000. All those in favor of striking those lines from the capital plan, please raise your card. I see 3, so that amendment is defeated. Now you have the entire capital plan in front of you as it was originally proposed and moved. All those in favor of the capital plan, please signal by raising their card. I see many cards. All those opposed? I see 3 or 4 cards. So the capital plan is approved as was presented. Now moving on to the budget, I believe, Article 7. Ms. Adams.
Okay, Article 7, I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate $37,569,000.43, transfer $877,011.90 from the Sewer Enterprise Fund, transfer $48,000 from the PEG Access Enterprise Fund, transfer $60,812.19 from the Reserve for MSBA debt, transfer $46,473 from the Artificial Turf Revolving Fund, and transfer $55,837.50 from water betterment revenue to defray the charges and expenses of the town for fiscal year 21 of $38,158. Oops. Nope.
38 million.
Too much homeschooling. Yeah, and I'm in charge of it, right? $38,658,115.02, and to fix the salaries and compensation of all elected officials of the town and any other items included in the budget of the town manager.
Okay, is there a second? I see cards. Board of Selectmen, your recommendation?
Recommend approval.
Finance Committee?
Recommend approval.
Thank you. So at this point in time, Ms. Lemieux, you're going to give us a presentation?
Yes.
You told me for the last month, everything gets 3 slides. How you doing?
I went over a little bit.
A little bit? Okay.
All right, but I tried to make it as brief as possible. So as we all know, 2020 has been quite the year already. In terms of the typical budgeting process, this year's budgeting process has been extremely challenging. Just as we were wrapping up presentations from departments, the pandemic was upon us and required a complete revamping of the budget. The pandemic has also required to draw out the process longer than the typical process. The budgeting process started in July 2019. Capital planning met from September until January, and I sent target budgets to departments in December and presented my original recommendation for the capital plan and 5-year forecast in January, and the preliminary budget in February. The pandemic and the economic impact meant revamping the budget from mid-March until today. Before COVID-19, the goal was to create a balanced budget that funded operating budgets using recurring revenues at current service levels with some. These are tenets in a stable economic environment, including expenditures a reflection of the cost of providing a level of service to residents of all ages in our community, to visitors traveling or doing business in Lunenburg, and maintaining or improving our assets. As a town, we provide services to students, we provide health and human services to seniors and veterans, recreational services, and public safety to all. The balance to provide the best services possible given the available resources, maintain our assets, and put aside funding for anticipated capital in our rainy day fund. In the current economic environment, in order to address the economic uncertainties and the impact on our revenues, the effect of not being able to include all the priority needs of various departments will have an impact on the level of services. Current recommendation includes a surplus that equates to actually over 10%, it's 11%, but postponing new positions and certain expenditures in order to absorb decline in state aid. The current recommendation does not represent the needs of our departments. It does not meet all of our financial policies, and it does not use free cash on the operating budget. So going back to the original recommended budget. In terms of revenues, the original recommended budget revenues were based on property taxes that levied to the limit, use a new growth amount of $193,400, and debt exclusion amounts known at that point. Included the governor's House 1 state aid figure, which was a 2.28% increase. It included our local receipts at a 2.27% increase over the previous fiscal year, which is a conservative estimate because these are elastic revenues. In terms of other available funds, it used $889,000 from free cash to offset the capital plan, OPEB, and the regular stabilization account. Also used MSBA reimbursement funds we received, the artificial turf revolving funds, and water, sewer, solid waste, and PEG access enterprise funds. The original budget for general government added additional hours for the assistant town clerk. It addressed below minimum wages for election and census and registration salaries, included new voting booths, and an increase in IT software costs. For health and sanitation, included additional hours for our Board of Health administrative assistant. For the police department, included an additional full-time patrol officer. And actually, the bottom line that the police department submitted was less than the target due to other cuts in their budget. The fire department included an additional career firefighter. For the DPW, included an additional $50,000 for pavement management, an additional $27,000 for ADA infrastructure, and cut for the assistant mechanic position. For the Lunenburg Public Schools, included a 2.5% increase, or $520,000 increase over the previous fiscal year. For non-operating expenditures, the capital plan originally was at $1,329,133. For the OPEB trust fund, it included depositing $110,000 per our policy into the OPEB trust fund. It included depositing $100,000 into the stabilization fund per our policy and allowed for $175,000 for allowance for abatements. The budget that is being recommended for your approval today is vastly different from the original recommended budget. For property taxes, it does include the taxing to the levy, but reduces the new growth to $173,400 and includes the latest debt exclusion amounts that we have at this time. For state aid, the current recommendation level funds from the fiscal 20 amount for state aid, but that excess amount that you see on your summary sheet is to offset any cuts to state aid. For local receipts, the recommendation level funds from our fiscal 20 amount. And we have made a practice of conservatively estimating our local receipts, and this is a prime reason for it, because these are elastic revenues. So we're very confident in our local receipts number. Other available funds, it uses free cash for the non-operating budget and $14,000 less of free cash due to changes in the capital plan made by after the pandemic started. Other sources of available funds are relatively similar from the previous fiscal year, except for there are no funds from the sale of cemetery lots, and it also includes indirect costs for the PEG access enterprise. This slide just is a demonstration of the different breakdown for projected revenues from the original recommended budget to the revised budget. So on the terms of expenditures, the revisions that were made, it level funds our cherry sheet offsets, state and county charges, and choice and charter assessments from the fiscal 20 amounts. For general government, it eliminates the added hours for the assistant town clerk and eliminates the IT, 18,000 in the IT budget. For the health and sanitation, it eliminates the additional hours for the Board of Health. It postpones the additional full-time patrol officer until the fall when we have a better financial picture. And it postpones decision for the additional career firefighter till the fall. It defers the additional 50,000 into the pavement management plan and the additional 27,000 for ADA infrastructure. And it cuts 25,000 from the stormwater line item. For general insurance, that line item was reduced by 9,000 due to receipt of our renewal estimates. For debt, it adjusts the payment schedule by 109,000 according to the final bond and ban amounts for the ladder truck, sleeper property, and middle school, high school project, and the pavement management debt exclusion. And for the Lunenburg Public Schools, it decreases it to a 1.5% increase, or 328,000 increase over the previous fiscal year. So the school budget, as a result of the economic impact from COVID-19, the superintendent presented to the school committee on April 29th a revised budget, which was ultimately approved. And this included a sped teacher at the Turkey Hill Elementary School, a Wilson Orton Gilheim reading teacher. It increased the unemployment line and reduced the salary reserve line down from 322,000 to 30,000. The expenditures that are the same as the original budget, it includes contractual, union and non-union salary increases. It eliminates the position of the assistant town mechanic. That was for 40,000. It reduces electricity costs by 8,000. It reduces the central purchasing line by 4,000. The health insurance budget was originally estimated at a 6.5% increase, and our renewal came in at a 0.66% increase for employees and 5% for our retirees. For the Monty Tech assessment, the target budget assumed a 2.5% increase. Our actual assessment was a 14% increase, or 111,000 over the previous fiscal year. For retirement was actually 11% increase, which is 148,000 over the previous fiscal year, and it level funds our tax title account. For non-operating expenditures, we just reviewed the capital plan, and the recommendation was reduced, eliminating the 650,000 that came from tax revenues to the $647,880 of free cash. For the OPEB trust fund, it defers the vote on depositing 110,000 into our OPEB trust fund. For stabilization, it reallocates the deposit of the 110,000 into OPEB and adds it to the 100,000 that we had planned on to deposit into the stabilization fund for a total of 210,000. For the allowance for abatements, it reduces the amount needed based on a review of our funds held in this account. So we reduced it from 175,000 to 120,000. This slide shows our updated debt schedule. The total appropriation for fiscal 21 is $4,695,155. And this reflects the payment schedule for the middle school and the management bond that we just received bids for. The interest rate for this bond came in at a 1.99% rate. Another update is the actual payments for the Saliba and ladder truck bans, and this reduces our estimate from originally by $26,779. This debt schedule keeps into account we have a financial policy on percentages of, based on, compared to our omnibus budget, and it keeps within our financial policies. So conclusions, the recommended budget is radically different than the budget from the beginning of March. It postpones decisions on new public safety positions and added hours for the town clerk and Board of Health, pavement management and ADA funds until the fall town meeting. It defers capital projects originally in the fiscal 21 capital plan and the deposit into OPEB trust fund to the fall town meeting. It funds all existing staff contractual obligations and non-union salary increases. It uses recurring revenues for operating costs with no draw on stabilization or free cash for the operating expenses. There's a net loss of one town employee position. It includes a 1.58% increase for the Lunenburg Public Schools. That includes 2 positions. Recommended budget does not meet the needs of the town or school departments. And it leaves a surplus of $1,056,425 to offset a decrease in state aid. COVID-19 doesn't change the fact that the budget does not address the staffing needs for our public safety departments, does not address the staffing needs for our schools. And although it defers such things like adding the planned $50,000 into pavement management and $27,000 into ADA, these infrastructure needs do not go away. The postponement of capital projects does not mean those projects are still not necessary. And the postponement of putting money into OPEB doesn't address our growing liability in that bond rating companies include not funding the liability as a weakness when reviewing the town's debt. As we look ahead, there's still a number of uncertainties related to state revenues and the impact on state aid and the long-term impact of COVID-19 on the overall budget and how it will impact the need for additional services such as public safety, health services, food insecurity, outreach to seniors, and educational needs. State leadership from the Ways and Means Committee have given no indication of what the state consensus budget will look like and have said that it could drag out past July 1st to see what that represents to state aid, but they have expressed that education and state aid priorities. We are eligible for FEMA and CARES Act funding for any deficits related to COVID-19 that are not budgeted in both fiscal 20 and fiscal 21 of over $1 million in CARES Act funding alone. We will continue to monitor our actual receipts and revenues as they come in at the start of the fiscal year and make any necessary adjustments at the fall town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So I neglected at the beginning of the meeting, especially thank you for coming today, because I know that there's a lot going on, and I wanted to make sure I thanked everybody. I want to especially thank the school and Mr. Londa for all the work they've done getting set up and getting the place cleaned up for us so that we could have a meeting today. I want to thank the chief of police and his men and women for all the work they did in getting us organized here. And I want to thank Ms. Lemieux because I know that amid having a whole COVID crisis going on in town and having to readjust the budget because of all of that, I know how hard she's been working. I send her emails at 10 o'clock at night or see her at meetings at 10 o'clock at night, and I have an answer at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank those people, and I want to thank Heather. We're going to go over the budget. It's on page 27 of your warrant. And if you can open that, this is how we do the budget in Lunenburg. The budget that she's recommending will be on the far right column, starting on page 27, going through, I think, 29 to 30. What we do is we read the category and the amount in the category. If you have something you want to address in that particular category, you're going to raise your hand, raise your card, so that we know that's something that you'd like to discuss, and then we'll go back to that particular line item when we get there. So make sure you raise your cards, and everybody up on the stage, help me make sure that I see people. So total maturing debt, $4,000,000. $699,521.44. I don't see any hands. Total general government unclassified, $3,246,916.39. I don't see any hands. Total general government, $1,590,980.65. I see no hands. Total central purchasing, $56,280 and no cents. I see no hands. Subtotal police, $1,881,254.69. I see no hands. Subtotal fire department, $1,149,830.36. I see no hands. Subtotal radio watch, $302,560.87. I see no hands. Subtotal other protection, $201,557.20. I see no hands. Total protection, $3,535,203.12. I see no hands. Total health and sanitation, $79,055.93. I see no hands. Total DPW, $1,782,187.86. I see no hands. Total facilities and buildings, $720,578.71. Total solid waste recycling, $218,634 and no cents. See no hands. Council on Aging, $159,812.84. I see no hands. Subtotal veterans, $105,775 and no cents. A lot of this makes no sense. Total assistance, $265,587.84. No hands. Total schools, $22,029,972 and no cents. I see no hands. Total library, $433,197.08. I see no hands. Total omnibus budget proposed, $38,658,115.02. Okay. So the motion, the article, the budget is before you. Nobody raised their hand to discuss anything, but you still have a moment now before we vote. If anybody needs to address anything on the budget, Article 7, step to the microphone, raise your card. I see no one. I declare we're ready to vote. It's a majority vote. All those in favor of Article 7, please signal by saying aye. Oh, excuse me, raise your card instead of saying aye. Of course I have it. Okay. I see many cards. All those opposed to Article 7, raise your card. I see none. The vote passes unanimously. Good job, people. Article 8, Mr. Jeffers.
I move that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $210,000 to the stabilization fund. Board of Selectmen recommends approval.
Okay, is there a second? I see a card. Board of Selectmen already said they recommend approval. Finance?
Finance Committee deferred.
You've deferred? Okay. Remind me to take your vote, which I think I skipped on the capital plan. Okay, so after the debate or discussion. Are you going to tell us about this, Ms. Lemieux, or somebody from the Select Board?
Oh, I have one slide on this. So the request is to transfer $210,000 from free cash into the stabilization fund. This meets the town's financial policy on maintaining total amount that is at a minimum of 5% of the current omnibus budget. It also includes the $110,000 that we originally intended to deposit into the OPEB trust fund account. and deferred due to the economic uncertainty. And the benefits of maintaining is it maintains, we have the next to highest bond rating, which is a AA plus, and equates to lower borrowing cost, and the source of funding is a source of funding in the events of emergency.
Thank you. Anyone who raised their card or, okay, Mr. Beardmore, please.
I have a question for the town manager. During your presentation, through the moderator, of course.
Go ahead.
During your presentation, in the budget presentation, you mentioned that there is $1,056,425 in excess levy capacity. And my understanding is the way that the budget has been constructed is that the money that we are not spending on 600 and some odd thousand dollars in capital planning, that's free cash that is going elsewhere. The money that we're not spending in the teacher's reserve fund, the money that we're not spending for the additional firefighter, the additional police officer, the money to the pavement, we are effectively not levying for that spending. And so our budget today is below the 2.5% levy limit. My question is in the event that there is a resurgence of the virus and we are unable to hold a fall town meeting and therefore unable to raise and appropriate those funds, let's say, to backfill the budget for lack of state aid, or to move those funds back where we intended it, for the police officer, for the firefighter, for the pavement, for what have you. What are our alternatives? Is that money just not going to be raised and we all pay less in taxes, and we're basically ceding the opportunity to raise and appropriate those funds?
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Ms. Amy? Yep.
So that dollar amount reflects what would be a 11% cut if state aid were cut. The budget does reflect a taxing to the levy. So I would ask the finance director to also add to that as well.
Finance Director, you back there?
Back here. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
All right. Ms. Lemieux, could you repeat the question, because she's all the way in the back?
I didn't hear it.
Mr. Beardmore, you want
So my question, Karen, is are we taxing to the levy limit right now? And in the eventuality that we do not have a fall town meeting, are we effectively leaving money on the table and therefore, going throughout with substantial excess levy capacity? And my reason for asking it right now is, would it make sense to take that money and put it in stabilization now?
Can you put the microphone closer to you so we can hear you really loud and clear?
Sure will. Based on the current budget that the town manager has recommended, we are levying to the capacity. The $1 million surplus that you see sitting on the revenue projection is actually the 10% reduction that we anticipate between a reduction in our local receipts and a reduction in our state aid. So
Okay.
that money isn't really there right now. The only way that we would have any of that $1 million would be if the state aid and/or our local receipts came in higher than that $1 million surplus that you see sitting there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Birchfield?
I just wanted to clarify, I think, because Mr. Beardmore had asked me earlier, and when we were talking about the levy limit, I think my understanding was that over the years, there's like a little bit of money between the 2.5% and what the actual levy limit is. And I think So when I said yes, that's what I was referring to.
Okay, fair enough. I appreciate your taking the time to answer.
So it's not really excess levy capacity, it's unappropriated revenue at this time. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay. So, Finance, you need to come up with a recommendation if you want to caucus that at your microphone.
No, we had already recommended approval.
No, you
for the-
didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry, which one are we on? The stabilization?
You are on stabilization fund.
Okay, we recommend approval.
That's a big thumbs up. Okay. So, seeing no one else with questions, all those in favor of Article 8, please raise your card. Thank you. And all those opposed? Passes unanimously. Now we're going to skip, I believe, all the way to 19. Woohoo. And Mr. Beardmore, don't you ever say again that we won't be able to have a town meeting. I forbid it. Thank you. Ms. Adams, number 19, animal bylaw.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, we're on 19.
19.
Okay. Article 19, I move that the town vote to amend Chapter 110 of the town's general bylaws entitled Animals by deleting therefrom in its entirety Section 110-3 entitled Dog Kennels and replacing it with sections A, B, C, D, and E as printed in the town meeting warrant booklet.
Thank you. Is there a second? I see a card. Board of Selectmen recommendation.
Recommend approval.
Finance Committee.
Recommend approval.
Thank you. Now, number 20 also addresses the animal bylaw here. Article 20 deals with the fines associated with Article 19. So we can discuss them together, understand? Now, who's going to speak to this, the chief or Ms. Lemieux?
The chief.
The chief? Okay, chief.
Take care.
We're going to discuss Article 19, but you can also discuss 20. We'll vote on them separately. Chief, go ahead.
For several years now, the legislation has made changes in the statute pertaining to this. Particularly in 2018, the acts of 2018, which actually has to do with the kennel bylaws. The reason they did that, their efforts are aimed at trying to stop animal abuse. So essentially what this article is this bylaw is just we're just updating the bylaw to be in compliance with the state law. It's essentially all it is.
Anyone with any questions about Article 19 for the chief? I don't see any cards, so I'll declare we're ready to vote. All those in favor of Article 19, please signal by saying your card, raising your card, thank you. I see many cards. All those opposed? I see no cards. Passes unanimously. Stay right there, Chief. We're going to talk about Article 20. I believe Mr. Jeffries is going to move Article 20.
I move that the town vote to amend Chapter 1 of the town's general bylaws entitled General Provisions, Section 1 through 3, entitled Non-Criminal Disposition, as printed in the town meeting warrant booklet.
Thank you. Is there a second? I can count on you, Mr. Alonso. Board of Selectmen recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommends approval.
Thank you. Finance Committee?
Finance Committee had no recommendation as we found it wasn't a material impact on the budget.
No recommendation doesn't impact the budget. Thank you. Anyone like to discuss the Article 20 fines associated with Article 19? I don't see any cards, so I'll declare we're ready to vote. All those in favor, please signal by saying aye, or raise your card, rather. Of course I have it. Okay, I see many, many cards. All those opposed to this article? I see none. Passes unanimously. Article 21 talks about street light purchasing with Mr. Blatt. Mr. Blatt here? Somewhere? No? Green Committee? Okay, somebody could move Article 21. Mr. Alonso?
Moment, Mr. Moderator.
You take all the moments you want. I don't think we're going to be here till 9 o'clock tonight, and I'm doing well. Kathy's hungry, but other than that.
Hold on a second. Can I confer with our board, please?
You may.
with no Mr. Blatt here to decide this, and with some of the emails, does the board feel like we can pass this over till the fall? Would people on the board agree or not agree? I move to pass over Article 21.
Second.
Well, you don't have to say it, show your card. There you go. Somebody show their card. Anybody. Second it. Thank you, thank you. Board of Selectmen, that's your recommendation. Finance Committee?
We would approve,
Excellent.
recommend approval to pass over.
Of passing over, okay. All those in favor of passing over Article 21, please raise your card. Anyone opposed? Passes, oh, one person. Are you opposed? Anyone opposed, raise your card. Okay, one person opposed, but it passes by a large majority. Article 22, Mr. McQuaid.
Move that the town vote to amend the Code of Lunenburg by deleting from Chapter 140 of the town's general bylaws entitled Excavations and Earth Removals, both Article 1 entitled Earth Removal and Article 2 entitled Excavations in their entirety, and substituting the language as printed in the town meeting warrant booklet.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Board of Selectmen recommend?
Be deferred.
Defer, okay. Finance Committee?
Just over, yeah.
We had no recommendation.
None. And Planning Board, what was your vote?
Well, it's the planning board's article. There was no vote as it's a general bylaw. So the planning board did support it as they submitted it, but being it's not zoning, they weren't required to submit recommendation.
Okay, I'll accept that. So, Mr. Bernie, I assume you're going to tell us about the article?
I am.
Go right ahead.
So this bylaw goes back probably three and a half years at this point. There was a point where the Board of Selectmen had suggested that earth removal was better served in the planning board. So over the years, we've been working on this. We brought this to the last town meeting in a much more substantial alteration that included not only altering the language for earth removal, but also adding in earth fill. At this point, that's been removed, and the changes are just to contemporize the bylaw for earth removal. The largest change is the increase of the threshold volumes for earth removal. Currently, well, I'll run through the quick changes. The bylaw avoids ambiguous language and specific submission criteria. It switches the permitting authority from the planning, or to the planning board from the Board of Selectmen, and it does that in order to streamline the process to allow for multiple permits to be carried out through a singular concurrent hearing. The existing law has a removal threshold of 10 cubic yards, which is less than one truck full of earth. The new bylaw increases that to 1,500 cubic yards to better reflect larger earth removal projects that would need to go through rigorous permitting. It switches the permitting authority, as I said, from the Board of Selectmen to the Planning Board. It carries over the exemptions similar to the existing bylaw with the addition of driveway permits, as often these can require significant removal. The current bylaw doesn't have any language explicitly providing regulations for submission materials and operation criteria, although at any time the Board of Selectmen could choose to implement regulations through their normal regulation process. The current bylaw outlines the manner in which that would happen, the creation of regulations through a public hearing process. Again, the threshold increase is increasing. The low volume is hard to police, and often people are removing this amount of earth without a permit, without realizing they need a permit. The 1,500 cubic yards, while some may say that, well, that's still not a lot, it's much more than many bylaws require, and is generally more representative in a in a project not associated with some other type of building subdivision, building permit, or septic system that
would not be incidental to someone preparing a garden or otherwise. Here is a very quick rundown of other communities and their thresholds. Shirley is 500 cubic yards, Pepperell is 250, Townsend is 20, so not much more than our existing. Littleton requires a permit for any earth removal not associated with a building project without a permit or something to that effect. Westminster is 2,000 cubic yards. I got a little wonky with a return there, my apologies. Winchendon is 20 and Hubbardston is 500. So other than Westminster, we would be the second largest earth removal volume requiring a permit in this general area. The permitting authority transfer from the Board of Selectmen to the Planning Board is intended to do several things. One is streamline the process. Again, earth removal permits are going to need stormwater approval in most cases. That's done through the Planning Board. Doing those in conjunction with each other would be beneficial. If the earth removal is happening on a site, it may also require site plan approval per a recent decision by the building commissioner. So again, we could cover 3 permits in a single hearing. A lot of times what we find is when someone comes to the planning board, a lot of issues related with earth removal may be brought up in stormwater or site plan hearings. The board doesn't generally have a lot of ability to address those. This would remedy that and would allow for a more holistic review of the process. And this is for all of the wonderful abilities the Board of Selectmen has dealing with macro and micro site issues. While they are capable of doing so, is not a regular or comfortable job that they do, whereas the planning board is often looking at specific site issues, abutter impacts, and those things. It's very specific to sites and not as wide-reaching and omnibus as a lot of the work that the Board of Selectmen is often looking at. Exemptions, again, as I mentioned, they're staying more or less the same with the addition of the driveway permits. It was something that was brought up at the last discussion of this bylaw, and the board felt that it did fit into the idea of the exemptions. These driveways are permitted through the building department, so there is a review and there is some control over those. And finally, the regulations. This is, the planning board held a public listening session. There were a lot of local earth movers in attendance. Many of the issues and concerns that they brought up revolved around some of the items in the regulations. These regulations are not finalized. They are in draft form. They have been seen. And they will require a public hearing at the time that this bylaw becomes, if it passes at the time it becomes legal after the Attorney General's review. And the board has recognized that there are some items in there that were brought up at the public hearing that will be adjusted, and there will be another opportunity for discussion of those regulations at the time.
That's it, Mr. Barney. Thank you, Bernie. Thank you very much. Sir, and then Mr. Jeffries after you. Yep. Come right up to the microphone. Don't be shy.
I'm Darrell Plant, 490 Lancaster Ave. My wife and I, and now 6-year-old son, moved to Lunenburg almost 4 years ago. We chose this town because, number one, we had a good school system. Another topic. Second, the town was patriotic, respected its police, fire, and most importantly, respected private property rights. 7 months ago, I stood here when there was no virus and spoke about the continued erosion of real property rights. I stood against the then 2020 Article 11, excavations and earth removal, and said the planning board is overreaching. Article 11 of 2020 was soundly defeated. 7 months later, in the midst of a pandemic, we are again considering rewriting our excavation and earth removal bylaw with Article 22. This article, like the one proposed 7 months ago, uses vague language and terminology, which can be interpreted many different ways. It empowers neighbors to have a veto power over what a person may do with their property. Yes, this article increases yardage from 10 to 1,500. However, read the entire article fine print, and I come to the conclusion that this is meaningless. There are many examples in the warrant that prove this point. This article is just one more attempt by government to take away personal property rights. And yes, shameful at this time. It is time for pushback. Vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey, Mr. Proctor, and then Ms. Evans. Mr. Jeffrey?
Thank you. You know, I'm not aware of any business owner who's in the business of earth removal who come to the town to say, hey, we have a problem with our bylaw. Can we adjust this so that way it better meets the needs of the community? I'm also not aware of any resident in our town who's come to the planning board or to the board of selectmen who's also made the same petition. So when our government proposes 6 pages of regulation to something that no one is asking for, I think we have a problem. Now, the current bylaw does have an extremely low threshold, and I understand that this board's perception is that that we're ill-equipped to enforce it. My attitude is, so what? You know, if we don't have a problem, what are we fixing? What are we trying to fix here? So I would support that we, although I appreciate the efforts of the planning board, I certainly think that we're making regulations for the sake of making regulations, and I would urge the voters to oppose this article.
Thank you. Proctor?
Dan Proctor, 1529 Mass Ave. In response to what Mr. Jeffries just said, there was a lot of problems with the earth removal process. And by the same token, I feel like the planning board has brought it too far with more regulations, okay? As a business owner in this town, I feel like the earth removal applicants are getting targeted more than other business practices in the town of Lunenburg. Plumbers, landscapers, construction guys, concrete guys, everybody can work on Saturdays in the town of Lunenburg, okay? As an earth removal applicant, I cannot work on my site on a Saturday due to the regulations that were imposed on me, okay? You can truck in the town of Lunenburg between the hours of 6 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. I can't work my earth removal until 8 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon, okay? I don't work Saturdays because I'm trying to get out of my house and away from my wife, okay? I work Saturdays because I have to make a living, and I have to pay my bills, okay? I was born in the construction business, okay? My father was a farmer, he started the construction business. We sell most of our supplies in the town of Lunenburg, okay? I just recently opened up a pit, and I had 2 people stop immediately, said, hey, I live down on Arbor Street, I'm looking for some material, would you be able to truck to Arbor Street? Certainly, they're gonna save money, okay? If a contractor has to haul it from Ashburnham or someplace else, it's gonna cost them more money, okay? So earth removals are very vital to the town of Lunenburg. We all need material to do whatever we wanna do in this town. Build swimming pools, septic systems, additions, driveways, anything, all right? Why do we restrict the earth removal process to what we restricted, okay? I can't crush the gravel on my property. You understand I'm gonna load 20,000 yards of material onto trucks. I'm gonna drive 5 miles down the road where I can crush gravel legally, okay? Go by probably 50 houses, crush the gravel, now turn around and truck it to the final consumer. Why wouldn't it environmentally make more sense to just leave it there? I can crush 20,000 yards of material in 2 weeks with today's equipment, okay? We can keep the noise down, we can keep the dust down, we can crush all that material, move it once. Does that not make more sense from an environmental standpoint rather than running diesels down the roads that we just spent a lot of money through the highway department to repave? Why do we restrict an earth removal guide, okay? I'm not PJ Keatings, all right? I literally have 2 trucks, 2 drivers, and myself, okay? I recently opened up the operation. One of my abutters had a complaint, called my office, I showed up, I addressed what he wanted to address. First thing he said to me, are these all your trucks that are driving down the road because they're using their engine brakes and they're way too loud? I said, no, sir, those are not my trucks. Those are all the trucks coming out of Keatings because they're paving Hemlock Drive. So So this is what happens. We get accused of right off, it was my trucks that were making all the noise, okay? It wasn't. We weren't even hauling out of there. So the gentleman who just spoke is right. Why do we regulate it to the point that we can't make a living?
Thank you. Ms. Adams?
Okay, thank you. I wanted to put some context to this and then respond to a couple things from previous speakers. In regards to personal property rights, that's the problem with any law or regulation is there's rights on both sides of the property. And so if there's a gigantic earth removal project and there's residential abutters around it, the people next door may be faced with constant dust, constant noise. And so when you talk about personal property rights, the person next door to the gravel pit has probably a right to maintain their quality of life. So personal property rights or speed limits or anything, they put restrictions so that they try to look to give a positive outcome or compromise to everybody involved. So rights shouldn't go in the direction of being able to do a massive earth removal project without looking carefully at how it impacts the environment or the people around that site. For example, why restrict an earth removal opportunity? It could be a field next door to you that could all of a sudden become, a year-long gravel pit, operation. So I think it has to go through a process. That being said, my primary point in terms of the process, and for anybody who hasn't followed along earth removal permitting, currently it belongs with the Board of Selectmen. It has, for some time. And as the land use director said, we don't deal with anything to really site plans and such. And so it feels like it's in the wrong place that we issue the earth removal permits. Planning board seems like a better place for that to be. Part of this article will move us from being the permitting authority to the planning board. Why does that matter? Well, when there's a project and engineers have to come present it, they have to present it to the Conservation Commission, they have to present it to the planning board, and they have to present it to us. And there's so much redundancy in that. By moving it to the planning board, it gets it into a place where there's less redundancy in needing to seek permission for one single project. So I think that's a huge benefit. The other thing is, as we've been learning more about earth removal permitting, which has happened over the last couple of years with the previous building commissioner, got us up to date with a lot of the earth removal permitting. It identifies and brings aware to the fact that 10 yards currently needs a permit. Okay, for that wasn't followed and it wasn't enforced. Now that we keep saying we have that policy, I think we need to enforce it. Once you identify you're not following a law, you should probably start following it. Nobody in town wants us running down looking for people removing 10 yards to get a permit. If it doesn't move to the planning board, where it would be less redundancy, which I think would help, and if it doesn't switch, right now the threshold is 10. The threshold will be 1,500 yards. So right now it's easy for earth removal permitting if we're not really actually requiring it, current regulations or policies. But I just feel like we keep saying, oh, just leave it the way it is. Well, if it's the way it is, then I think, and I've said this at our own meetings, then the Board of Selectmen needs to say, we have a policy that requires a permit for earth removal at 10 yards, and we're not following it. We need to talk to our building commissioner, our land use department, and start following it. Nobody wants to see that. And so as we stand here and speakers talk about, regulations and things, our current regulation is absurd at 10, if you looked at what the land use director showed other communities are doing. Nobody wants to see us follow that, yet that's our current law. That's our current regulation. I think it's time to move it to the planning board where it belongs. I also think it's time to get an appropriate threshold. And the interesting thing is, if something about it doesn't work, or if it's too restrictive, it can continue to be changed. It can be changed at fall town meeting. It can be changed next spring. There could be a special town meeting to change it. It's always evolving, but there's so much improvement. There's so much improvement in letting this pass so that it gets it away from the selectmen, it puts it with a group of people it belongs with, creates less redundancy, and it actually makes a better threshold. And then if there's still a problem, good news, we can keep making it better. But it's time to say yes to this so that we get it into a place where we're actually following it and it actually makes sense.
Thank you. I'll get to Mr. Barney. Go ahead, sir. Bernie.
Dave Mackey, 384 Townsend Harbor Road. And I hesitate with my address because after this meeting, 7 months ago, I guess it was, somebody approached my home and did a smoky burnout in a pickup truck at just after midnight. So whoever's doing that, I would appreciate it if they didn't do that again. I want to thank the planning board and the Board of Selectmen for listening to the citizens and our concerns from the last presentation. I think this is less obtrusive and more thought out in terms of its effect on different operations. I believe there's still some ambiguous language in this particular bylaw, but it's not as restrictive as the previous version. I guess I'd like to hear how, the regulations are going to be written at some point in the future, how that process work collaboratively with the businesses that we rely on for our services, our taxes, our employment. It's hard to find these laborers. It's hard to pay for this very expensive equipment. There's all sorts of liability. It's very dangerous work. And if we've got to go to some other town, not in my backyard, we've got to go get our material from hundreds of miles away, potentially, all right, that's an exaggeration, 50 miles away, to some other town that's less restrictive. I mean, we're kind of damaging the environment, as one of the previous speakers said. So I'd just like to hear how the regulations, which aren't in final form, will incorporate a close relationship with the people that have to earn a living in this town. Thank you.
And Mr. Verney, can you address the gentleman's
Yeah,
question?
I'll address the previous speaker first, and then I'll go back to my other comments.
Thank you.
So the regulations have been drafted, and they are in draft form. When the planning board held their public listening session for this bylaw, those regulations were available, and many of the comments we received regarded information within those regulations. So the board has some comments from a lot of the local removers, and we'll look to incorporate those. And as we get closer to holding that public hearing, we'll be looking for additional input from the people in town who operate in that sector. It just makes sense that the rules and regulations serve the town's purpose of providing safety and public health to its residents, but also work in a way that those folks who have to do that business here in town have at least some input on addressing things that would be problematic to them. The planning board would have to advertise a public hearing, so 7 and 14 days ahead of time there'd be an advertisement placed. The discussion of the regulations would be at a public hearing. Anybody can come and comment and speak on that. So there's plenty of opportunity for these folks to be involved. As practice, getting ready for this town meeting and the preparation of this bylaw, we sent copies of the proposed bylaw to all permit holders or potential permit holders, those folks who either were in the process of getting a permit or held a permit looking for comment. One of those individuals spoke today and came to the hearing and provided comment at that time as well. There were some fairly vocal members of that community at the last town meeting. They were provided with the opportunity to review the bylaw and also came and spoke. So the board has taken steps to try to incorporate comments and incorporate input from the earth removal sector here in town.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that and that's an ongoing process? So there'll be.
Yeah, they can't hold the hearing for those regulations unless this passes and goes through that process and becomes law, because this is what gives them the authority to create and approve those regulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, then.
And Mr. Moderator, I want to go back to a previous speaker who is well known and respected as far as earth removal here in town. And this individual said that there are existing problems with our bylaw, which I think is very telling. This individual also went on to enumerate a number of things that are hampering his ability to provide earth removal operations here in the community. And I just want to stress that the issues that were outlined are not part of this proposed bylaw or part of the existing bylaw. They were conditions that were placed in response to the specific application. I'm not going to adjudicate whether they're appropriate, inappropriate, and I can't speak to the impact they have on that business because it's not my business. But this bylaw doesn't require any of those conditions to be placed. It is actually explicit in what is required for application and what the standards would be. And a previous speaker to that spoke about the ambiguous language in this. I would put forth an argument that the existing bylaw is grossly more ambiguous than anything included in the 6 pages of regulations. I've done this for a number of years, and you guys see me almost every year at the end of town meeting, and I always tend to have 6 or 8 pages of something, and it's not intended as we're going to regulate this to death, but it's intended as we want to be as explicit as possible about what the standards are so that everyone who comes in front of the planning board or it has to deal with the bylaw is aware of what the standards are and is treated on an equal basis. If we propose 1-page bylaws, if we propose 1-paragraph bylaws, you can't cover enough to reasonably expect that all people are going to be on equal footing because you're subjectively approaching each application based on a genuinely ambiguous standard. So the planning board has worked tirelessly over the past 18 months to try and be as fair and as reasonable as possible, but to be as explicit as possible to provide for a standardization of the permitting process, which I think Selectman Adams or a previous speaker had mentioned was not always the case over the past. The language doesn't allow for standardization. It's based on the subjective nature of the composition of the permitting body at the time. And this bylaw is attempting to be more standardized and allow for consistency throughout the permitting process.
Thank you, Mr. Burney. I know I have 3 members of the select board who wish to speak, but I'm going to hear from the citizens first. I'll hear from this gentleman, I think might be Mr. Esposito.
I'm John Esposito, Malpas Road. First of all, I want to direct my first comment to Mr. Burney, I believe. There's nothing sensible and reasonable about this bylaw. Last fall, right in this room, we had a meeting just like this, and this bylaw was voted down. So what the planning board did is they went back and they changed a couple of words in it, so they were able to bring it back and have another vote on it, and they'll do that forever until they get it passed. That's how they operate. The other thing is, you know, it sounds pretty good what you're saying, but it's not that simple. When you go to get a permit to do this gravel operation, it's nowhere near as easy, as simple as you think it is, or you say it is. This law is going to affect everybody in this room one time or another. And it's not sensible, it's not reasonable, it's overreaching, it's another rule, it's another regulation, it's another restriction, it's another fee. And the taxes we pay in this town for our property, I think we should be able to do just about anything we want with it. It's just, you know, the planning board is trying to, from my perspective, put their thumb on everything in this town. Pretty soon, you're not going to be able to cut your grass or plow your driveway or rototill your garden without a permit from somebody. And you just, I think you're out of line.
Thank you, Mr. Esposito. Mr. Levesque.
Jim Levesque, 33 Lancaster Avenue. First of all, I wanted to echo a previous comment about the fact that the planning board did take seriously feedback the last time this was brought up. I think you made great strides in coming up with a bylaw that is workable, allowable for the regulations to speak for themselves, and that you separated the regulation from the bylaw to the point where you can do that separately and have those regulations and restrictions. Secondly, Mr. Bernie, I appreciate you following up about those restrictions, because I heard a previous speaker speak about they couldn't work on the weekend. I didn't see anything about a weekend in the bylaw. So I think what we need to separate is that the bylaw, I fully support moving the permitting authority away from the Board of Selectmen. They don't want it, and they are not equipped to handle that properly, in their own words. The changes that the main changes that you outlined all seem very reasonable to me. Increasing cubic feet from 10 feet to 1,500 seems very reasonable to me. And then the ability for the citizens to then speak at a public hearing on the regulations that are going to the bylaw allows them to have that feedback on the restrictions that will be placed overall. I think we did something very similar with the Architectural Preservation District. We established the bylaw, then we came up with the regulations, then we had meetings, public hearings, and everybody was able to come to a consensus on what needed to happen for the community. I support passing the bylaw as written.
Thank you. I'm going to go down the row with the selectmen, and then I'll call on Mr. Clark. Mr. Jeffries.
I just want to urge all of you to, all of us, to listen to the people who are in this industry, and listen to what they're saying. You know, we all have a need for these services. Certainly, this bylaw is not going to cut our costs down, and it's not going to cut their costs down. You know, I think that when we choose to regulate an industry, certainly I think we all can agree that 10 yards is too low. But I think we need to focus on the things that we do agree on first. And it seems as if we've gone far beyond that as this has been crafted. So I again would urge for, certainly I respect the process of the planning board, but I would again urge that we have a roundtable, that the planning board or this board has a discussion with the business owners in the community, so that way we have regulations that better address and regulate their needs. And unfortunately, you know, this is the second time in a row that I believe we're not doing that yet.
Ms. Adams.
Okay. I think one thing, you know, like at town meeting, there's a lot of information going here, and then there's a certain amount of people that haven't followed it, and so they're learning it here. And so for that, I just want to bring us back to some of the most important parts of Article 22, just to summarize it and keep it on point. Is one thing is that currently the Board of Selectmen have to issue earth removal permits. There's nothing that we do that really correlates well with that responsibility. The planning board deals with site plan review and basically everything that earth removal permitting is. And so this article moves the authority from us to the planning board. I think that's a win. I think that's something we should accomplish, is as we would need to then take a look at the 10 yards and start to change our regulations, and we're less equipped to do so, in my opinion. So this article, I think, is just a definite opportunity to put the permitting authority with a group of people where there's less redundancy for everybody involved. And I think that's one reason it should be voted yes. The second reason is everything that's being talked about in regards to the industry and over-regulation. I have followed earth removal permitting very closely, to the point of having gone to dozens of meetings, both at the planning board, our own meetings, conservation meetings. And one thing that's not being represented here today, and I will speak on their behalf, is that when an important earth removal project happens, which we hear from people who support the removal here, it also affects abutters. And I became involved with a group of abutters. There were 4 abutters to a project. And they tirelessly followed the project to try to protect their properties from the dust, the noise, and the devastation that the earth removal project would do to their residential properties. Unfortunately, I don't see any of them here today because I know there would be a lot of input and a lot of stress that I witnessed and I went on site walks and everything. So what we're not getting here is when we talk about regulations and things, there's a reason. But the most important point for anybody who's, hasn't, I delved into earth removal and like got really into it. So if you haven't been into it, the most important thing here with Article 22 is our current bylaw is supposed to require that somebody digging up dirt needs a permit for 10 yards. That's tiny. That's what we currently have, but we don't regulate it. This new one moves it to 1,500. So and it has restrictions like driveways. So it moves it to a point where if you're doing removal under 1,500 yards, you don't need a permit. And that's a lot of things. If you're doing something really gigantic, like creating a gravel site in a residential area, then it's got to go through a process to protect the butters and people. So the most important things I would summarize is the permitting authority moves to a better place, and I think we need to get there. We can't, that's why this keeps coming back, because it shouldn't be with us. We keep trying to give it away. And then another reason it comes back is because what we currently have is a bylaw that is very vague in some ways, but highly specific with 10 yards that we don't regulate. Moving from 10 yards to 1,500 is less restrictive, no matter what anybody wants to say.
Mr. McQuaid, the junior. I got another one in line over there.
Yeah. I will start off by saying, yes, I believe this process belongs with the planning board, not the board of selectmen. Yes, this is better than the bylaw that's currently on the books, and also certainly better than what was presented at last town meeting. The thing that stands out to me is, and again, raising the threshold, absolutely important too, and that takes it to make sure that most of us in town won't have to apply for an earth removal permit for anything we do on our properties. But the people who bring us the soil and do the projects for us, put on our septics, do the project that we want to do, this does absolutely affect them. And while this all sounds perfectly reasonable, what I think is missing for the people in that business, what would make them feel more comfortable, is that there's nothing in here that says they have a right to operate their business. There's nothing that says they can buy a piece of property with confidence that they'll be able to get an earth removal permit on it. All it does is talk about the reasons why they wouldn't be able to. So again, what I feel is missing is some assurance to them that they can, operate their business with some degree of certainty. Whether it's up to you all now, whether we tell the planning board to go back and fix it before you approve it, or you recognize this as an improvement on the current situation and approve it now, but I think there's still more work to do on it in the future, to recognize that we do have a business community in this town that needs our help.
Mr. Alonso, Mr. Clark, and then Mr. Ellison, in that order.
So first I want to start by saying I support the bylaw. I would say that, part of the process is the involvement, and often we hear that, elected officials or appointed officials don't listen to the public. So the last time this was proposed, there was a whole earth fill portion of this, and if I remember correctly, the majority of that discussion was about the earth fill. So the planning board heard that, and they removed the entire earth fill piece of this. So now it's just earth removal. They listened to the exemptions that people said about buildings and about driveways, and they added that into this. And I get the impression that through all these processes, there'll be no point where there's a certain faction that will not be for this, no matter what is put in here, no matter how reasonable it is. We've heard things about how the length of the bylaw. There's an impression that the longer the bylaw is, the more restrictive it is, and I couldn't disagree more, and I agree completely with Mr. Burney, is that the length of the language used is to further define and refine what you're talking about and certain specifics of it, and to try to encompass and as inclusive as possible the different kind of cases. The less you put in, the more it's really like a Wild West. So there's a balance between how long it is and how short it is and how much you define. So there's always going to be an area of ambiguity. There's always going to be an area of flexibility. But I think they've done their due diligence, and I don't think that this bylaw is worse than the other one. I think it's better than the one that's existing now. I think the change to the planning board is a good one. I think the change in the cubic yardage is also a good one. The other thing is the people who have objected it so far had objected it to it in broad senses, even to the absurd where, the planning board's not going to be allowed you to mow your grass to bring into that. I have not heard anybody point to a line, a paragraph, anything in the exact proposed bylaw that says, you know what, this is what I'm talking about. This line or this paragraph is too restrictive. And I don't think they'll find it, because the things that have been talked about don't have to do with the regulation. They have to do with orders of conditions that were placed on some of these, and that has to do with the makeup of the planning board itself. It didn't have to do with the regulation. They didn't have to make those hours. They did because of other things. And the last thing is, when it comes to property rights, all regulations and all bylaws are a balance of property rights. So certainly I think people should have the ability to do what they want with their property to a degree, because your neighbors who you abut also have a degree of rights about what kind of neighborhood and what kind of environment they should be involved in. All bylaws are a balance of those things. I think this strikes a good balance. I think this makes the right decision. I think the planning board has listened and made the modifications that people asked them to, and I think now is the time to pass this.
Thank you. Mr. Clark.
Mike Clark, 275 Cross Road. I agree with a lot of what I heard here. It sounds like you've taken this and done a lot of work to it. But it sounds like it's been discussion with just the boards listening to people. The one gentleman who's running his business to this, I'm surprised he came and spoke against it if you were engaging with the people who are running the businesses. I'm wondering why we don't have 3 or 5 people in the earth removal, processing, excavating business coming here and saying, this is a good article, we work together, we created something that works for everybody. When you hear that they got to take material and move it somewhere else and then do something, bring it back, maybe they got to do excess, even I'm in manufacturing, don't do anything your customer isn't willing to pay for. Why would you have to process extra? Why would you want to build inventory speculating when you can be on a site, process what you need, and get it done, and leave? As long as, of course, it's not interfering with the abutters' rights to their quality of life. But it doesn't sound like we have people in the business coming up to the microphone and saying, yeah, we worked with you, we received your proposed bylaws, we marked it up, we met, and we brought this to something as a general consensus that'll work for them, work for people that would be affected. So I would recommend vote it down, get the people who are really impacted by this together with you, and go for another round and come back in the fall. Thank you.
Mr. Bernie, I'll give you the final word, but I'm going to hear from these 2 other gentlemen. Mr. Allison. Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Matthew Allison, 188 Flat Hill. I'm also the chairman of the planning board. I'd like to go over a little bit of history here. For a long time, we've had an earth removal of 10 cubic yards, and I'm not sure how many permits were issued aside from the 2 major ones. There's the person who spoke earlier, and Keatings, I believe. I'm sure that there have been hundreds of 10-yard removals that went under the radar or whatever. Planning board's not asking for this. Planning board is being asked to do this. Planning board never had oversight of earth removal, never had any input on the creation of the existing bylaw. Now, let me remind people that earth removal bylaw is a bylaw to protect all the property owners in this town from the commercial business of removing earth. The only people who seem to stand up and have a problem with this are those commercial industries who deal in removing earth. We did, in fact, have a listening session. We had a public hearing. We had invited everybody to come to us. We said, well, look, please help us fix this. there was a great conversation. I remember it going on to 10:30. At the end of it all, everybody seemed to be fairly understanding that the 10 cubic yards was ridiculous, and that the modifications need to be made so that it could be something that's usable for everybody and is enforceable. So then we looked at those people and said, well, were you aware of this 10 cubic yards? No. Please help us fix it. And if you don't, I'm sure I can speak for anybody who's going to be on planning that we don't really want it. This bylaw, along with many of our other bylaws that nobody likes regulation, nobody likes being told what to do. That's what you have a planning board for, so that you can get everybody together, come up with the best things for the town in general. You can't cherry pick, you can't favoritism. You have to find the middle ground that works for everybody in town, that can be regulated efficiently and it's not over the top or completely useless, which I think is what we've got now. And I would also say that if we don't vote this new bylaw in, then please vote no on the next article. Thank you very much.
Mr. McQuaid.
Well, Doug McQuaid, 30 Cushing Lane. And my point is that we've kind of put the cart before the horse. Article 23 actually takes the responsibility away from the Board of Selectmen and gives it to the Planning Board. So, we can defeat this and still give it to the Planning Board. And from that point on, they can work within their own organization to try to square it away, working with all the people that are in the business and those people who figure that they might be affected by the business. So seriously, why are we voting on the rules before you turn around and give it? You could vote on these rules, cancel 23, and still leave it with the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Mr. McQuaid.
Mr. Moderator, the text...
Mr. Bernie.
The text of
Mr.
Article
Bernie,
20...
in a minute.
Oh,
In a
sorry.
minute. Thank you. Okay. You done, Mr. McQuaid?
I believe I am.
Okay.
I'm sure he's going to come up with the answer that's going to say, well, it's kind of written in there that the planning board is going to get it, but you're not going to get it if we turn down 23. It's going to be left with the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, so rather than let you figure out what he's going to say, let's hear it from him. So go ahead, Mr. Bernie.
On page 15 of the warrant, the permit granting authority in Article 22 is the planning board. So by the deletion of the existing bylaw, which this article would do, and the insertion of this language, the planning board becomes the permitting authority.
But you still become the permitting authority if we cancel 22 and pass 23.
That is correct. But
so that's what I'm saying. We don't need the regulation for you to take over. All we have to do is pass 23, you get it, and then you can start working on this thing with the industry and the general public with a little more common sense in what's going on.
Okay, you both made your point. I'm going to talk to the gentleman at the end. We've got Mr. Proctor, because he's in the business. Mr. Bernie's going to get the last word, and then we're voting. You're up.
Darrell Plant, 490 Lancaster Ave. I don't see where it says anywhere in this warrant that this is regulating an industry. I don't see where it says anything about controlling, having to do with dealing with a commercial activity. If it is exclusively on that focus, and Mr. Proctor's over there, if that's the design of it, why doesn't it say it? This is not about regulating an industry or dealing with a commercial activity. It has more to do with managing people's own property. And that's where I talk about personal property rights. If you have over 10 acres or 20 acres and you want to do something with it, this is just another hurdle you're going to have to go through if you want 3 or 4 more lots on your property. And you have to move material around substantially. Because there is language in here that's arbitrary in terms of the nuisance that can possibly be created. And it does give your neighbor a say, a legal say, in terms of what you can do on your property. Now, no one should be able to, affect somebody's property, their neighbor, so badly that, there's like as if there's nothing that can be done about it. There's places in the law that can address those people's concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Proctor, Mr. Bernie gets the last word, then we vote. Mr. Proctor.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say I'm not the guy that didn't get along and play well with others in the sand pile, okay? That's just not me, all right? I have no problem with the planning board taking over for the selectmen. I get that. I understand the whole 10 yards was a ridiculous bylaw. I understand that. But I guess what I don't understand is we're voting to give it to the planning board. We have some regulations, but then the planning board's saying it's not totally finished yet. So, like Mr. McQuaid just said, why shouldn't we just vote first to give it to the planning board? Okay, that's a yes/no type of thing. Then we're going to talk about what the regulations are going to be, and then we're going to vote on what those regulations are. Because my concerns are hours of operation, what I can do on that site as far as processing material and all that type of stuff. So I guess that's what I don't understand. Are we voting on that, or are we voting just to give the planning board the authority?
Answer that, Mr. Bernie, then the last word.
Okay, so we're voting to establish the bylaw. The items that you're speaking about would be included in the regulations, and the regulations were something that I believe you had seen because they were discussed at the public listening session, and they did include some things about hours and about the operations on site and what would be required to do that. I don't have them all memorized, but to my recollection, there's nothing prohibiting gravel processing on site. That would be most likely a case-to-case individual site basis on what the surrounding land uses were, what was happening, hours, that kind of stuff. We are voting to transfer the permit granting authority to the planning board, but also to alter the bylaw to reflect this language. Now, the substance in this bylaw is closely similar to the width of coverage that the existing bylaw has, but it is more specific. So there are changes to the bylaw that outline very specific things, including how to promulgate the regulations, what the permitting procedure looks like, which are explicit in the existing bylaw. The day-to-day operational, the conditional, and specifics of how earth removal would be conducted on a wider scale are contained within the regulations. And again, I think most of the comments that the board heard outside of the quantities at its public listening session were in reference to items within the regulations. I know that the board has committed to continuing to work on those regulations with the folks who would be regulated. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Well, I guess, if you want me to raise my card, in 5 minutes, then assure me that I can process material on site, everything, not just the topsoil, and that my hours of operation won't be restricted to Monday through Friday, that I could also run my operation from, 8 till 1 on Saturdays, and put that in whatever we're gonna vote for in 5 minutes, and then I probably would raise the card. But if that's not gonna happen, then I'm gonna oppose to it. Because the regulation for the selectmen running the gravel removal, okay, which we've had forever, I understand the whole 10-yard threshold was ridiculous. But at the end of the day, we've had earth removals in the town of Lunenburg. Every year, Mike Savigno would go out and inspect the pits. He called me one time because we had an overhanging, cliff. So he said, Dan, you ought to address that because it's a safety issue. The next day we went down with the machine, we took care of it. He said, great, you're all set. So, like Mr. Esposito said, we in the business, we don't want to fix anything because other than the 10 yards, which was ridiculous, we all had earth removal permits and we abide by them and we did what we were supposed to do. And at the end of the day, we paid every year for the earth removal permit. So again, I just feel like we're voting for two different things. But if you tell me that I can run my business and I can also do Saturday operation and I can process gravel, then I'll raise the card and say, oh, I'm all in favor. So can we put that in what we're going to vote for in 5 minutes?
Well, what I will say is
I see you.
As much as I would love to guarantee that you're going to vote for this, Mr. Proctor, because I think you probably carry a fair amount of weight. There's nothing in the proposed bylaw, well...
Actually, I lost about 10 pounds, but then
No,
the virus,
metaphorical,
then we've
not
been eating
physical.
out a lot, so... but-
Metaphorical. There's nothing in this bylaw that says you can't do that. There's also nothing that guarantees you the right to do that. And I think that the purpose of the bylaw is not to do that. It's to outline what's being regulated, and the regulations would get to the specifics of that. So if you were to operate a gravel removal site in a remote area where there was no one around, I can't imagine the planning board would say, no, you can't process gravel and you can't work on Saturday. If you were to go to Pleasant Street and park yourself at one of those homes that sold, and you said, wow, there's a tremendous amount of great gravel here, I'm going to dig it up in this densely populated neighborhood, and I want to crush gravel and I want to work through Saturday, there may be some mitigating circumstances where the board feels it's not appropriate. So as much as I want to give you those kinds of assurances, I don't think it's something that I could reasonably do, because the bylaw doesn't cover that. That's something in the regulation, and I think oftentimes those are going to be very site-specific determinations.
Okay?
Right, and unfortunately, when we have a meeting, then the abutters stand up and they voice their concerns, which I understand that, but at the end of the day, it's a commercial property that I have. It's not a residential, it's a commercial property that I have. Okay, if I was gonna apply for a building permit and we had to cut the grade down 10 feet, I could bring mining equipment in there and I could mine it and I could crush it and I could do all that type of stuff. But again, this is where, when we start having too many regulations, the balancing act ends up getting lost, because now we're being more restrictive and we're basically tying my hands to what I'm trying to do.
And what I want to do is, and I understand 100% where you're coming from, and I understand the whole process that's happened to get you to this point, but I have to divorce this discussion from any specific project, because this is omnibus. It covers everything. It covers every operation in town, and whatever the merits of the permit you were issued are, to me, at this point, in reference to this bylaw, aren't, I don't want to say they're not relevant, but they're not part of this discussion, because we're not talking about the merits of that project. We're talking about all projects, and if this bylaw said you can crush gravel at any earth removal operation, the town could permit an earth removal operation in a densely populated residential area where it may be appropriate, but all of the extent of that operation that is appropriate at Keating's or at a commercial or industrial area wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in that residential area. And this bylaw is for the protection of all the citizens and residents of the town, and so we have to take those opportunities into account so that in the instance that they come up, the town officials aren't saying, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. It says that they can do whatever they want as far as earth removal within the context of this bylaw.
How many earth removal permits are there in the town of Lunenburg right now? How many companies?
Oh, there's two holders. I would say there's probably less than 10 permits.
Okay, so there's two holders. Who are they?
Yourself and the Keating Corporation.
Okay, and for whatever reason, I keep getting linked with Keating's, okay? I mean, I'm not Keating's. Okay?
And I understand.
Keating's imports, liquid asphalt, they mine gravel, they have 100-foot cuts, they crush, and unfortunately, again, you throw everything together under the earth removal, and it's a big difference, and that's the problem.
And I understand that.
Ms. Adams, I will recognize you when I recognize you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Adam.
I know I lost control of the conversation, but it was a good conversation, and I wanted the two of them to have it. Furthermore, the selectmen still haven't voted, so you're going to get a chance, as you caucus with the select board, to get your final word. I'm going to recognize this gentleman because he hasn't spoken today. Then I'm going to give Mr. Burney the last word on his article. Then the Board of Selectmen can speak and caucus, and you'll get a chance to speak again. Thank you, sir.
Matt Snyder, 985 Flat Hill Road. The existing bylaw that there seems to be a lot of desire to hang on to, even though it's flawed, and many have admitted that, there's this paragraph that says control of operation. In approving the issuance of a permit, the board shall impose all reasonable requirements which shall be deemed necessary by the board and may include grading, seeding, and planting, fencing, necessary for public safety and screening unsightly operations, methods of removal, location and use of structures, hours of operation, routes of transportation, and on and on and on. All the things people are concerned about being imposed by the new bylaw are already in the existing bylaw. What we're doing is stepping back the restrictive requirement of 10 cubic yards, which we aren't enforcing, and we're shifting the authority to a board that's more appropriate to do so. The same restrictions are here. All this says is we're not enforcing the bylaw we already have. All the complaints are about we're not going to get a pass anymore on the bylaw we already have. So I see no reason not to pass the new bylaw, which eases the restrictions, puts the authority in the right place, and does nothing more restrictive than what's already in this paragraph, which says, based on the specifics of that installation or that project, we could restrict the heck out of you based on this paragraph.
Thank you. Mr. Bernie, you have the last word, then the select board is going to caucus, so the select board will all get a chance to talk. Go.
Well, I think the previous speaker said more or less what I would have said, and probably a shorter bit of turn. So.
Okay, selectmen, caucus and give us your recommendation.
We have to caucus live, so.
Yes, you do.
I'll go down the line, Mr. Jeffries.
No.
Say what you want and then say what
Yeah,
your vote
sure.
is.
So,
Oh, sorry. I thought you said no and we're, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I think for the reasons already stated, I think we've combined this discussion to Articles 22 and 23. I think I've been vocal in our meetings that I think that since this authority rests with our board, that before we punt it off to another board and tell them to fix it, that we have a responsibility to attempt to fix it first. And so I'm not in favor of Article 22 or 23.
Ms. Adams.
Okay, I am surprisingly in favor of it. The reason I sort of tried to make a point of order is I didn't think that back and forth was really appropriate for the town meeting. It's about a highly specific circumstance that I followed very closely, and since so much input has been given, again, I will speak on behalf of abutters that I got to know very well. The site is a commercial site that had 4 residential abutters, and it was originally requested that 50,000 yards be removed from a site that was, fairly small, maybe 7 acres, and it was surrounded by residential abutters, and it was a trying process. I followed it along, and 50,000 being removed with somebody's backyard next door, the amount of dust and everything, if you imagine what it'd feel like to find out that that's going to happen next door to you. We had a lot of input here from a previous speaker who was going to profit from the 50,000 yards being removed, and then it was going to negatively impact the neighbors. And so there was a process that is necessary to look at everybody's rights in that situation. And so I didn't mean to be rude, but a point of order when there's sort of a specific debate happening about a specific item, it's taking away the focus from the intentions here. So for anybody who hasn't followed a specific case or even the history of all of this, the last speaker who spoke summed it up. We have a bylaw. With the bylaw, we can be restrictive. And it's supposed to be 10 yards, which means we should be running around giving out permits daily, because this is just happening all around us. Nobody wants to see that happen. And then this moves the authority to some place where I think it'll be easier to work on, easier to perfect. And just because these bylaws are going to the planning board, it doesn't mean they can't be improved, changed, or even voted to come back to us if people thought we were better at it. Government keeps evolving, and instead of spinning the wheels on not getting anywhere with this, I think there's a really positive opportunity to put the authority with a group that's more equipped to handle it, and it's really actually making a better bylaw if we were following the one we had. And now shame on us for not following a bylaw we
So
had.
4 or against?
4.
Okay, Mr. McQuaid.
Hesitantly against. Again, I agree with a lot of the reasons we're doing this, a lot of language that's in here, but to be on board with it myself, I need to see something in the bylaw that the earth removal business has the right to exist. And saying that we'll catch up with it in the regulations doesn't give me a lot of faith, because it's not for the entire town see that. It's just the planning board will hold a public hearing, but at the end of the day, the whole right for these people to exist, their business to exist, lies with the planning board.
So you said no. And I would say, I couldn't disagree more with your last statement. If we wanted to not allow earth removal companies to exist, we wouldn't have an earth removal permit process. So I would say that the difference between this, to answer the question, the difference between this and the next article is that this one gives it to the planning board and it makes changes to the bylaw. If we just pass the next one, the bylaw doesn't change and the bylaw needs to change. That has to come to town meeting. Okay, regulations can stay within the board, but the bylaw is changed only by town meeting. So this is the chance to do this. They've done everything people asked them. They've been give and take. They've invited the earth removal companies to come and give their input, which they have. I think they've listened to it, and I think this dresses up and really refines the existing one, and I am for it. So therefore, 2-2.
2-2, got it. Okay, so we're now ready to vote on Article 22. Thank you very much. It's a majority vote. Again, we're raising hands. We're not yelling. You shouldn't be spitting and yelling. That's why we're not doing it that way. So it's a majority vote. All those in favor of Article 22, please raise your card. Okay, and keep them up. It's going to be close. Okay, all those opposed, put your cards up.
It's going to be close.
Well, I'm not the best counter in the world. I would have it 25 to 23, but I'm going to ask the counters, everybody put their hands down. I'm going to ask the counters that I've designated, I hope they're all still here, to count. I have 2 people counting just this side. I have 2 people counting the whole middle, which includes the finance and the select board, and I have 2 people over here, all the way up and all the way down for everybody on this side. Ms. Birchfield, you lost your card? You're putting your hand up? I need a card. All right. Okay. So all those in favor of Article 22, raise your card and count. Go ahead. Wait, sorry. I thought Mr. Proctor was talking to me because he was the counter. Okay? So just, Mr. Blatt, just hang on. We're voting now on passing Article 22. All those in favor of Article 22, raise your cards, and then the counters have to agree on the number, and then the counter comes down to the microphone and tells me the vote. So one of you gentlemen come down to the microphone and tell me how many on my left in favor.
2.
2 in favor on my left. In the middle, somebody come down and tell me how many in the middle are in favor. And the middle should include all the people up on the stage.
I counted 13.
13? And your counter agreed with you? No, the counters have to agree. Okay, so the 2 counters in the middle have got to count together, agree on the number, and then come down and tell me what it is, okay? So all in favor in the middle, keep your hands up. And Mr. Levesque, I think it is, and you agreed with your counter.
Yes.
People on my right.
We counted 12, including Mr. Bernie. We didn't know if he was including in the middle count.
Say that again. You counted Mr.
We counted
Bernie.
12, including Mr. Bernie.
Everybody on this side, including Mr. Bernie. Okay, all right. How many?
12.
12. It's okay, it's hard to count. I tried it myself. Everybody in the middle, keep your cards way up. Make sure you get everybody. All right, come on down and tell me the number in the middle, including everybody up here.
We agreed on 13.
Excellent. Okay, everybody currently have their hands up, put it down. Okay, now, all those opposed to Article 22, your cards, please. Okay, so people on my left, come down, tell me your number, sir. Number opposed on my left.
We have 12.
12. Number opposed in the middle. This is the middle.
We agreed on 10.
10. And on my right, Mr. Levesque,
We agreed 7.
7. And our trustee clerk is going to tell you what the number is. Say it again. 29 is
27 yes.
27 yes, 29 no. Double check it, right? I don't
And we
know.
have a quorum still.
I wasn't doing the numbers.
That's good, right?
Ms. Adams, she tells me those are the same numbers. 27 in favor, 29 opposed. The article does not pass. We move on to Article 23, please.
Article
believe-
23, I move that the town vote to amend the Code of Lunenburg by deleting from Chapter 140 of the town's general bylaws entitled Excavations and Earth Removal, Sections 140-1, 140-14, 140-15, the words Board of Selectmen, wherever they so appear, and substituting therefore the words Planning Board as printed in the town meeting warrant booklet.
Okay, is there a second? There's a second. Select Board, do you have a recommendation? Not yet? Select Board, do you have a recommendation?
Recommend approval.
Recommend approval.
Recommend
4-1.
approval. Finance Committee, a recommendation?
We have no recommendation.
No recommendation. Okay. Mr. Bernie, do you want to speak to Article 23? I know we've talked a lot about 22, but it's...
No, this just takes the existing bylaw and removes the Board of Selectmen as the permitting authority and inserts the planning board wherever the Board of Selectmen is referenced.
Okay, so it just changes the permitting authority.
That's correct.
Okay? Everybody got that? Anybody want to stand at the microphone? Oh, Mr. Jeffries would like to speak.
I'd like to amend Article 23 as well to also change in the existing bylaw. I move to change the existing bylaw to increase the amount regulated from 10 cubic yards to 1,500 cubic yards. 23. Making an addition of 23. And I'll repeat that again. That's to increase the amount regulated from 10 cubic yards to 1,500 cubic yards.
Second that.
Okay, there is a second. I appreciate that.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator?
No point of order for the moment, thank you. Mr. Jeffries, I'm going to call on town council. I have a serious concern that your proposed amendment is well outside the scope of what is contained just in Article 23. Mr. Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have the same concern. I'm reviewing Article 23, and the scope of the modification that is in the actual article printed in the warrant booklet is to do nothing more than substitute the words planning board for the words Board of Selectmen. No other modification is proposed in Article 23. So to amend the motion to include an additional modification to the bylaw, in my opinion, is outside the scope of the article as printed.
Yeah, I think it is, Mr. Jeffries. I'm sorry, but I won't allow that amendment.
So with that, then I would withdraw and I would add that this is further reason, knowing that this was a concern that was brought up previously, and the proposal that we are giving does not address something that we all can agree is a mutual problem, then I think that this should remain with the Board of Selectmen until we can present an appropriate modification.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Mr. Levesque.
Warrant Article 23.
Jim Levesque, 33 Lancaster Avenue. Based on prior statement from the Planning Board Chair, as well as Mr. Jeffries' comments just now, I am also against this amendment.
Thank you. Anyone else on 23? Seeing no one else at the podium or raising their hand, I'll declare we're ready to vote. It's a majority vote. All those in favor of Article 23, please raise your card. I see a few. All those opposed to Article 23, raise your card. Article is defeated. Article 24, our last article, and it's only noon. Mr. Jeffries.
I move that the town vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to fill a home rule petition with the General Court for a special act authorizing the town to grant an additional license for the sale of all alcoholic beverages not to be drunk on the premises to Jack's Country Variety. The proposed special act would read as follows. An act authorizing the town of Lunenburg to grant an additional license for the sale of alcoholic beverages not to be drunk on the premises to Jack's Country Variety. Section 1A, notwithstanding Section 17 of Chapter 138 of the General Laws, the licensing authority of the town of Lunenburg may grant one additional license for the sale of all alcoholic beverages not to be drunk on the premises pursuant to Section 15 of said Chapter 138 to Jack's Country Variety, located at 1353 Massachusetts Avenue. The license shall be subject to all of said Chapter 138, except said Chapter 17. B, the licensing authority of the town of Lunenburg shall not approve the transfer of the license granted pursuant to this act to any other location, but may grant a license to a new applicant at the same location if the applicant files with the licensing authority a letter from the Department of Revenue and a letter from the Department of Unemployment Assistance indicating that the license is in good standing with those departments and that all applicable taxes, fees, and contributions have been paid. C, if a license granted is canceled, revoked, or no longer in use at the location of original issuance, it shall be returned physically with all of the legal rights, privileges, and restrictions pertaining thereto to the licensing authority, and the licensing authority may then grant the license to a new applicant at the same location under the same conditions as specified in this act. Section 2, this act shall take effect upon its passage. Board of Selectmen deferred.
Defer. Thank you. So you're going to wait until you hear the discussion. Mr. Wernick, he is Jack's. Why don't you come down and tell us, Mr. Wernick, someplace if anybody's got any questions. The selectmen is deferred, so they want to hear from you or somebody else. Do we have a second on this article? Did somebody, okay, Mr. Beardmore will second. Selectmen have deferred. Finance, what is your recommendation?
Okay, so,
Oh, wait a minute, hold on.
sorry.
Somebody. Finance, do you have a recommendation?
If we made no recommendation, it's indicated that we've deferred. At this point, I'll say that we've deferred, and then we'll take a vote. But I believe that we had no recommendation because there was no financial impact to the town.
Okay, all right. Selectmen have deferred. Mr. Wernick, talk to us about your citizen's petition.
Okay, well, some of you know, my wife and I have been running Jack's Country Variety, formerly Center Pizza. We've been in business for over 20 years in the town of Lunenburg. We're not residents, but we probably spend more time in Lunenburg than we do at our own residence. What we're looking to do is just, we've been struggling over the past few years, and we're looking at avenues, a way of building our business, increasing our business, to bring people in, more people through the doorways as time goes on. That being said, we noticed that there's a lack of full alcohol licenses on this side of Lunenburg. It's mostly focused on Route 13 at the far end of town, with one being at Elena's in the center of town that only specializes in high-end beverages beyond the beer and wine. as far as our business goes, we look at it the same. The rules of the state apply, the IDs apply, all the licensing, all the insurances, everything else. Nothing really changes for us in the business, with the exception of the fact that we'd be able to offer Lunenburg residents full alcohol instead of just the beer and wine, which we've been offering for the past 20 years. At this point, my understanding is all we're asking for is that the town go forward to the state and request a license be offered, made available to us. That there is no guarantee, but this is just I'm guessing at this point, I'm not 100% positive, that this is more of an inquiry to the state as if they would allow this, as opposed to granting the license at this time. And I can be corrected on that if I'm misunderstanding that. At that point, I have nothing else to say.
Okay. Mr. Costa, you want to tell him about the licensing in the state so he'll know what's going on?
I can through you, Mr. Moderator. So the statement made by the previous speaker is correct, that what's proposed by way of this motion is simply authorization to submit a petition for special legislation. If the legislature votes to adopt the act as is printed on the screen, then that would then authorize the process to unfold. And so the applicant would still need to make application to the local licensing board, which would be the Board of Selectmen, and file that application subsequently with the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission for the actual issuance of the license. But because Massachusetts operates on a quota system, there's a limitation on the number of licenses you can have in your community. So this would make an additional license available to potentially be granted through that process to the applicant.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else looking to speak, so Selectman, if you could give us your recommendation.
Because of my personal relationship with Mr. Wernick and previous business relationships, I abstain.
Adams?
I would recommend approval. We did something similar at last town meeting.
Approval. It's an aye from me, so 3-0-1.
Thank you. Okay, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of Article 24 signal by raising your card. I see a lot of cards. All those opposed to Article 24, raise your card. I see none. It passes unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Wernick. Congratulations, Town of Lunenburg. We got through it. I appreciate all of you being here very much.
Well done.